Our story begins with a rather unusual sight, a zombie whose first priority is collecting milk powder and diapers. Because he adopted a human baby girl, every other zombie mocks him as a complete fool. But what they don't know, and how could they, really, is that this infant is actually the reincarnation of the human Empress. In her past life, she had conquered the four corners of the world, surviving countless trials of life and death. She had slain innumerable alien powerhouses, only to be ambushed at her weakest moment due to a sudden illness. She died at the hands of the brood mother of the starry swarm, but now, she has been reborn 50 years in the past. However, she has returned as a helpless infant, just as our protagonist has newly crossed over into this world. He managed to survive for a month on frozen meat found in a fridge, but now, that meat has finally begun to rot. While normal zombies might enjoy decaying flesh, he still possesses a human mind and simply cannot accept it. Left with no choice, he disguises himself as an ordinary zombie to scavenge for food, eventually entering a quiet home. Suddenly, he hears a baby crying in the next room, and after prying open the bedroom door, he pauses. He finds a room that remains strangely warm and cozy, standing in stark contrast to the bloodstains in the living room. On the bed, a 6-month-old girl is wailing, likely left there by her parents in their final moments of life. In this moment, he realizes they died protecting her, while the infant, enro, feels her heart sink into despair. She had struggled so hard to be reborn, yet the first thing she sees isn't her parents, but a monster. Facing a zombie while already weakened from a long period without food was more than she could bear. Between the physical hunger and the overwhelming terror of the moment, Roashua finally loses consciousness and faints. Looking at the little one, he feels a flicker of surprise. Though she is only a few months old, she seems different. Her eyes seem to reflect a deep sense of sorrow and helplessness, something he finds himself strangely relating to. After all, both he and this little girl are just two lost souls who unexpectedly ended up in this apocalyptic nightmare. He decided then and there to take a new direction in life, choosing to adopt this little one. But he suddenly realized the poor thing had fainted from hunger, and the milk powder cans were all empty. He resolved to head out and find some milk, carefully closing the bedroom door to keep her safe. He even pushed a sofa against the door to block other zombies, though his search in the kitchen yielded nothing. With no other choice, he headed upstairs, where the hallways were stained with dried, dark brown blood. Indescribable remains littered the floor, and despite the open doors, the stench of decay was nearly unbearable. We see him searching through several more apartments, yet house after house, the kitchens were completely bare of milk. He found only small scraps of partially rotted meat, until he finally reached a home on the 5th floor. There, the mistress of the house had turned, and her own child had already met a silent, tragic end. If our little one hadn't been locked safely in that bedroom, her fate likely would have been the same. Fortunately, he found 2 unopened cans of milk powder and a bit of fresh meat in the kitchen. In her dazed state, Yunroashua felt the taste of milk in her mouth and instinctively began to drink. As her energy returned, she realized this monster was actually using a spoon to feed her like a mother would. In her past life, zombies were nothing more than bloodthirsty monsters, creatures of pure, mindless hunger. She had even killed her own comrades who turned. She wondered if this zombie was simply fattening her up for later. He had no idea what the little one was thinking, but seeing her eyes open again brought him immense relief. However, she had gone without food for so long that a single bowl of milk simply wasn't enough. She was still hungry, but in that moment, he momentarily forgot that he was no longer human. He tried to speak, but only a low growl escaped his throat, so he turned away in silence. It took 3 more bowls to finally fill her up. Luckily, the sealed milk powder had stayed fresh for a long time. With no need to worry about the food spoiling, Yunroashua laid back in her crib, feeling quite satisfied after her meal. The entire situation felt utterly absurd to her, especially considering the aura coming from this particular zombie. It was clearly a first-order zombie, one that had only recently turned and possessed very little actual power. A creature of this level shouldn't possess any intelligence, yet she couldn't wrap her head around what was happening. But as an empress who had survived countless brushes with death, Yunroashua began to gradually regain her composure. Though fear still lingered in her heart, she told herself that even if he intended to eat her, at least she wouldn't die hungry. We see him watching the little one sleep, and for the first time in this nightmare, a faint smile touches his lips. It was a rare moment of peace and beauty, something he hadn't expected to feel again. To be honest, it was almost human. He knew leaving a months-old infant here alone meant certain death, so he decided then and there to take her with him. This was an old 7-story residential building, and the 2nd floor where they were currently staying wasn't safe enough. The 7th floor, being the top level, offered much better security, perhaps because this old neighborhood was so sparsely populated. There weren't many zombies around, but the ones that remained had already begun to mutate into grotesque, wandering forms. He didn't dare risk the little one's life by being reckless, so he used a metal rod to quietly dispatch any threats from behind. After settling her into their new home, he realized that despite his appearance, his instincts were still remarkably human. Most importantly, he found a complete set of baby supplies in the room, likely left behind by a family fleeing in a panic. They must have escaped in a hurry when the outbreak began. Interestingly, perhaps due to his recent constant activity, his limbs, which had been stiff and frozen after he turned, seemed to be growing much more coordinated and fluid. He could even perform simple human gestures now, and while he found this change puzzling, he didn't dwell on it for long. His mind was entirely focused on Yunruashua, but as he picked up a fresh diaper to change her, a thought struck her. An astonishing realization suddenly flashed through Yunruashua's mind. If being fed earlier was confusing, this was something else entirely. The fact that he was changing her diaper made her certain. She realized he must have retained his human consciousness. As she recalled the details of their first encounter, she noticed how different he was from any other zombie. He knew how to turn doorknobs, use a metal rod to pry doors, and even how to prepare formula for her. None of these actions fit the instincts of a common zombie, making her more convinced that his human mind remained. She believed only a human could suppress a zombie's bloodlust, but a moment later, Yunruashua's eyes widened. The zombie before her was clearly not a woman, and she realized her dignity was being sacrificed over a diaper change. However, she quickly let it go. Her life had been saved by this creature, and that was what truly mattered. Such a small matter wasn't worth dwelling on, especially as Yunruashua watched his stiff, gray limbs moving for her. Seeing him clumsily struggle to change her diaper, she felt a strange mix of touched and heartbroken, which is understandable, really. She imagined that he might have once had a happy family before the apocalypse turned him into this monster. The thought of his isolation, unable to belong to either the living or the dead, touched a soft part of her heart. And so, she decided to accept him as her zombie father. Meanwhile, he began considering their long-term food needs. He decided to stockpile supplies, though he knew appearing in daylight would risk exposing them both to survivors. To avoid suspicion, he chose to move under the cover of night. Before leaving, he carefully shut the bedroom door. He even blocked the stairs with a cabinet to prevent zombies or humans from intruding. He had seen how desperate people could be. Knowing the darkness of human nature during an apocalypse, he was extra cautious, firmly tying the first-floor iron gate shut. Only then did he begin his search. While individual houses didn't have much, the neighborhood as a whole was promising. After filling his backpack and grabbing more cans of milk powder, he began his trek back through the dark streets. But suddenly, he sensed something was wrong. Looking up, we see the moon hanging in the sky, stained a deep, bloody red. At the same time, Yunruashua woke up to find the room empty, having just finished making use of her fresh diaper. Suddenly, we see the blood moon through the window, signaling that the era of global evolution is about to begin. He was surprised by the sight of the crimson moon, but given that he was already living in a zombie apocalypse, and having seen similar scenes in sci-fi movies, he found himself accepting this strange phenomenon quite quickly. Deciding this was exactly how an apocalypse should look, he continued hauling supplies, not even sparing books or medicines. But during his fourth trip, he suddenly felt something wrong. A strange, burning heat flared up within his cold body. The sensation was both foreign and familiar, almost as if he were returning to the state of being alive. Then, an unbearable itch filled his brain, making his head feel as if it might explode. He feared his human consciousness was fading. He worried he was about to become a purely bloodthirsty monster, and for a moment, panic gripped his heart. Even the other zombies under the moonlight were undergoing the same transformation. Meanwhile, the survivors bathed in that red glow, felt their bodies heating up, their blood flow accelerating, and even their bones becoming significantly tougher. Back in the bedroom, little Yunruashua was also enveloped by the blood-red moonlight, her tiny body trembling slightly. Her body burned with fever. After some time, he finally regained his senses, though the world around him looked much the same. However, as soon as he moved, he realized his movements were far more agile, no longer stiff like a typical zombie. To his amazement, the black veins on his skin were fading, and hair was even beginning to grow back on his head. Even the zombies wandering the streets had changed. Their once hideous forms now looked somewhat more human, which is a slight improvement, one supposes. A flicker of joy rose within him. It seemed this world was not quite as simple as he had first imagined. As he passed another zombie, a strange sensation washed over him, as if a thin thread connected him to the creature. He feared it was a hallucination at first, but then he realized he had developed a truly unique ability. He could project his thoughts through that thread, as if controlling a puppet. As he focused, the connection grew even stronger. He successfully commanded the zombie to perform complex movements, and so, he named this power Zombie Control. After several tests, he discovered that, for the time being, he could only control a maximum of 2 zombies at once. Furthermore, if they wandered too far, his commands became imprecise, a limitation he suspected was tied to his own mental strength. He decided to call these controlled creatures puppets, and just as a wave of exhaustion began to wash over him, he suddenly remembered little Yunruashua waiting alone at home, so he ordered his 2 puppets to carry the gathered supplies. They hurried back toward the residential complex. One has to admit, zombies really are the ultimate laborers. They require no food, no water, and certainly no salary. Meanwhile, having endured the baptism of the blood moon, Yunruashua finally woke from her deep slumber as a flood of new information rushed into her young mind. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Unlike the talent she possessed in her past life, she had now awakened the power of telekinesis. With a mere thought, she found she could manipulate and move physical objects around her. But the greatest surprise was that she had also regained her previous life's ability, time control. Both talents held the potential for absolute greatness. In her past life, she had ascended to the throne of Empress using time control alone. To possess dual talents in this life meant her offensive and defensive capabilities would be truly formidable. She attempted to use her powers, but because her infant body was still so frail, she quickly succumbed to a stabbing headache and exhaustion. Even though her mental energy was currently quite weak, she remained incredibly optimistic about the future. She believed that as she grew, her strength would far surpass her previous peak, and she even began to fantasize about her adulthood. She imagined finally defeating the recombinant Empress who had killed her before. Suddenly, a noise echoed from outside the room. Enro guessed it was her zombie father returning, and she found herself feeling quite curious about him. She wondered if a zombie with human consciousness would awaken special abilities after the baptism, just as humans do. When he saw the wardrobe in the hallway remained undisturbed, he breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time in this world, he felt a sense of belonging. He easily moved the wardrobe aside and rushed into the bedroom, finding Enro awake and watching him obediently. Even though he had never even been in a relationship, in this moment, he truly felt like a father. He headed to the kitchen, but since the water and power were out, he had to use bottled water to prepare the baby's formula. As he stirred the milk, little Enro was also carefully observing her zombie father. She noticed he had changed, though it wasn't obvious. He looked a bit more human now, which was a start. This didn't match any zombie evolution types she remembered from her past life, where several distinct paths existed. There were tank-type zombies, massive and incredibly strong, acting as the heavy artillery of the battlefield. They were a survivor's worst nightmare, but she had expected something far more grand for her unique father. Seeing his lack of dramatic change after the blood moon, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. And so, Enro quietly decided that once she grew up, she would use her power to protect him instead. She knew that without him, a reborn infant like herself would have surely perished in this apocalypse. She believed in repaying kindness, especially a debt this great. The idea of caring for him in his old age was no mere sentiment. To her, it was a vow, especially since she knew the secret to how zombies truly evolved. The primary method of evolution for his kind was through the consumption of living beings. Beyond that, one could hunt the essence cores found within the brains of special zombies who had awakened extraordinary powers. She was confident that with her knowledge, she could seize these cores to fuel his growth. She would help him evolve into a high-level zombie, at which point he would regain the ability to speak. His physical form would even return to that of a human. Of course, he had no idea what the little one was planning. He simply found it amusing to see her staring at him so intently, and though he couldn't speak, he tried to use gestures. He wanted to show her that he had arranged 2 zombie bodyguards and even brought back some toys for her. Along with the toys, he had even brought educational workbooks, though he suddenly realized those might be a bit premature. When it came to naming her, he decided right there on the 7th floor to give little Enro the nickname Chi-Chi. He hoped this name would help them remember the good times in their small home on the 7th floor, feeling quite satisfied with the supplies he'd gathered. He believed it was enough to sustain him and Chi-Chi for a long time, but considering the uncertainty of the apocalypse, he remained cautious. He decided to observe the situation from home for a while, ensuring their safety before daring to venture outside again. We see him head to the living room and pick up a steel machete about half a meter long, wondering what the previous owner's profession could have been. It was strange to find such a long, razor-sharp blade in a normal home, and though he had never studied swordsmanship, he felt its weight. Relying on his powerful zombie physique, he found he could swing the machete with surprising fluidity and grace. He practiced his strikes with ease, and while he was training, little Enro took a short rest before returning to her own tasks. She began to ponder her innate talents once more, focusing specifically on mastering her newly awakened telekinetic powers. She concentrated her mind on a silver needle resting on the nightstand, and though her control was still slow and shaky, she persisted. Slowly, the needle began to glide through the air, and just like that, time began to slip away from our unlikely pair. 2 days passed, and both of them found their lives quite fulfilling. Then, just after he finished feeding Enro her milk, he heard a commotion outside and looked through the balcony window to see 2 zombies on the street fighting, though not over food. They were tearing at each other with a raw ferocity, and he was shocked by the sheer strength these 2 possessed, which far exceeded his own. He felt a wave of relief that he hadn't stepped outside. It seemed the world was becoming far more cruel than he had imagined. He knew he couldn't afford to be complacent just because he had evolved, as he watched the immense power radiating from those 2 creatures. Deep down, he realized that to survive, he would eventually have to face such strength and overcome it with his own body. He told himself that he would use his physical form to defeat them, steeling his resolve for the inevitable battles ahead. It was a silent vow he made to himself, a promise to grow stronger so he could protect the small life relying on him. He would use everything he was to conquer the threats outside, ensuring that their sanctuary on the 7th floor remained safe. He told himself he would use his own body to defeat them, even as the battle between those two zombies grew more brutal. He knew he couldn't afford to be complacent about his evolution, especially after watching the tank-like zombie rip out a crystal core. A powerful surge of desire rose within him. His instincts told him that this crystal core would be incredibly beneficial for his own body. It occurred to him then that the entire reason for this clash was a desperate struggle to claim the core inside the other's head. We see the massive zombie consume the white crystal core, let out an excited roar, and beat its chest in a display of raw power. It then began violently smashing the surrounding vehicles. Hearing the commotion, the nearby ordinary zombies froze in their tracks. They all chose to keep their distance, instinctively feeling a deep sense of dread toward this particular creature. The primal longing he felt upon seeing that core far surpassed any hunger he had ever known for mere flesh and blood. He realized that consuming a core would surely enhance his ability to control other zombies, but for now, he was clearly no match for that beast. Suddenly, his eyes fell upon the gas tank in the kitchen, and a plan for a makeshift weapon immediately began to take shape. At the same time, Yanruashua also heard the noise outside, and although she couldn't see the street below, she understood what was happening. Relying on her memories of the future, she guessed that the blood moon had pushed the world into an evolutionary frenzy of mutual slaughter. She knew human survivors would soon start hunting for these cores, eventually developing sophisticated methods of cultivation. As a former peerless empress of the human race, she had mastered the most elite technique in her past life, the glazed breathing method. Yunruashua understood that her zombie father, currently just an ordinary low-level creature, would struggle to survive this apocalypse. She told herself she had to increase her strength as quickly as possible to protect the two of them in this cruel new world. Even though she was currently trapped in the body of an infant, she could still practice the glazed breathing method. She began to draw in the energy particles lingering in the air after the blood moon. As the technique took hold, her small body trembled. As the energy flowed into her, she felt lucky to have been reborn with the chance to train so early in the apocalypse. A massive influx of energy surged through her, making her bones more resilient and significantly strengthening her fragile telekinetic powers. When he returned from downstairs to the bedroom, he saw her body trembling and assumed she had caught a cold. He hurried to cover her with a quilt. Yunruashua was startled awake, finding his worried expression quite amusing. At the same time, she felt the warmth of paternal love from her zombie father, having grown up in an orphanage. This was the first time she had ever truly felt a father's love, now that she saw little Chi-Chi was safe. He then began to ponder how to deal with that zombie outside. Such a dangerous ticking time bomb had to be handled. The next morning, he sent out zombie puppet number 1 to provoke the tank zombie, which was still digesting its power. After hitting the tank zombie with a flower pot, the puppet fled, successfully leading it toward the shop rigged with gas tanks. Just as puppet number 1 ran into the shop, the tank zombie charged, its massive frame smashing directly into the interior. It instantly crushed his puppet into pieces. At that moment, zombie puppet number 2 entered the shop. Closing the door, the puppet used a lighter to ignite the gas tanks, leaving the tank zombie to face the explosion head-on. The creature let out a series of shrill, agonizing roars amidst the sea of fire as it struggled to escape the shop. It collapsed right at the entrance. After the explosion, he quickly withdrew his consciousness from the controlled puppet. Seeing the massive zombie charred and fallen, he waited 10 minutes to ensure the beast was truly dead. Only then did he summon the courage to approach, finding the zombie burned beyond all recognition. Its body had sustained immense damage, yet he still had to use a great deal of strength with his machete. He finally cracked open the skull and found a white crystal core tinged with red, which felt far more tempting than the pure white ones. Based on his observations, pure white cores were produced when zombies evolved through basic means. They were created by devouring other zombies, but this red-tinged core was clearly of a much higher grade. As other zombies were drawn to the fire, he pocketed the core and selected 2 zombies with intact limbs. He stowed the core away and chose these 2 to serve as his new zombie puppets. After returning to the residential complex with his new puppets, he stationed them downstairs as guards and headed up to the 3rd floor. He could no longer suppress the deep craving for the crystal core, and so he swallowed it whole. As the core's energy tempered his body, he felt himself shifting even closer to a human form, his physical appearance noticeably improving. His strength and agility increased slightly, and after a brief moment of dizziness, his mind became remarkably clear. His 5 senses grew sharper, and he found he could now control up to 5 zombies simultaneously with total ease. We see him gain a new ability, shared vision, breaking the previous limitation of only being able to control puppets within his line of sight. He could now operate through remote control, meaning that within a certain range, he wouldn't have to show his face at all. Being able to command his puppets from a distance greatly enhanced his chances of survival, which, in this world, is everything. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Yunruashua had heard the distant explosion and the terrifying roars of the evolved zombie. Safe on the 7th floor, she wasn't worried about being spotted, but his long absence was beginning to weigh heavily on her heart. She knew all too well that in her current infant state, she stood no chance against a combat-enhanced, evolved zombie. Understanding the sheer danger of such creatures, she could only pray to the heavens for a miracle. She couldn't bear the thought of losing the zombie father who had given her so much love, and her distress made it impossible to rest. Just then, the sound of a key turning in the lock echoed from the door, and Ruashua felt a wave of instant relief. A small smile touched her face. After all, only her zombie father had the presence of mind to actually use a key. When he walked in and saw her smiling, he felt a genuine sense of warmth spreading through his chest. Knowing his increased strength would allow him to protect her better, he happily headed to the kitchen to prepare her milk. Watching her drink so contentedly, he felt as though his decaying body was being infused with a strange, powerful vitality. Over the next 2 days, he used his telepathic powers to command his puppets and expand their territory. He cleared out several rooms on the lower floors to use as warehouses, filling them with baby supplies and food. He even managed to find various tools for dealing with zombies, and although his life over the last few days had become somewhat repetitive, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, as he could clearly feel his strength growing with every passing hour. As for little Yun Ruashua, her days were spent entirely on drinking her milk and practicing the glazed breathing technique. Occasionally, she would hear faint, muffled sounds from the living room, which brought her thoughts back to the anomalies of the previous days. She guessed that he must have encountered an extraordinary zombie with evolved abilities, a creature of immense power. The pressure and combat strength of such beings far exceed that of ordinary zombies, who, in this transformed world, occupy the lowest status, facing constant threats from human survivors, their own kind, and mutated beasts alike. She was deeply moved that even in such a dire situation, he never once thought of abandoning her, especially considering how quickly human nature fades in the apocalypse. To her, the fact that her zombie father could retain such a spark of humanity was truly precious, which, to be honest, is a bit of a miracle. After many days of diligent cultivation, the strength of her telekinesis had improved significantly, allowing her to manipulate silver needles with lethal speed. Combined with her time control abilities, she felt confident she could now take a life without making a single sound. But she wasn't satisfied with this alone. She knew that to survive in this dying world, she would need to become much stronger. Meanwhile, we see him dispatching his puppets to search nearby buildings, where he discovered that one of the original owners must have been a martial arts enthusiast, leaving behind numerous textbooks detailing various close-quarters combat techniques. His physical fitness was already superior to a normal human's due to his evolution, and now that his body was no longer stiff, he found he could learn and execute complex fighting moves with surprising ease. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday for a zombie, in other words. While typical zombie attacks are primitive and crude, he realized that modern combat techniques developed by the human brain were far more efficient. Even though his evolution wasn't strictly focused on physical brawling, he believed that scientific fighting skills could bridge the gap in physical stats and allow him to exploit the fact that, as a zombie, he had no fear of being bitten. He began training to use weapons with maximum efficiency, and after mastering several key combat principles, we see him leading his puppet zombies to the 6th floor living room, where he releases his telekinetic control so they can serve as his sparring partners. They say no one can stop a zombie who knows martial arts, but after some practical training, he realized something important. Relying solely on theoretical study and self-exploration was simply not enough to handle the chaos of a real combat scenario. Only through actual combat could he truly master the essential skills of distance, timing, and reading an opponent's reactions. After repeated practice, he made significant progress in his fighting style, finding he could easily handle frontal attacks from ordinary zombies. He was transforming from a complete novice into a skilled fighter with genuine technique, which, naturally, was a terrifying prospect for his enemies. Furthermore, he discovered he could multitask with ease, practicing his combat moves while simultaneously refining his manual dexterity. While he trained, he also commanded his puppets to search for supplies, observing the surrounding area through their shared vision. It was during one of these patrols that he spotted 2 zombies scavenging for resources on the 3rd floor of Building 1. Suddenly, a blood-red figure appeared with terrifying speed, moving so fast it barely left a trace on the ground. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, so he ordered his puppets to track the crimson shadow. A few minutes later, he finally got a clear look at this creature, and its appearance was nothing short of a nightmare. Its skin had peeled away, its teeth and tongue were hideously mutated, and its hands had transformed into savage, beast-like claws. Though it had lost the ability to walk upright and crawled on all fours, it possessed unparalleled speed and explosive power. It moved across walls and ceilings with ease, and facing this blood-red horror, even his puppet zombies began to tremble with fear. The creature was a blur of motion, and in an instant, it had completely slaughtered the 2 puppets he was controlling. He wondered what kind of monster this could possibly be, and even after his consciousness returned to his own body, his heart remained heavy with dread. He he realized that some zombies were evolving abilities far beyond his imagination, and his current strength was nowhere near enough to challenge them. Even if he sent all 5 puppets at once, they would likely be killed in seconds, leaving him to hope this crimson predator stayed away from Building 5. He knew he couldn't afford to waste another second, so he spent every day training intensely against his captive zombies. To improve his strength, he continued his combat drills. A week later, we find him in the 6th-floor living room facing 3 massive zombies. He moved with surprising agility within the cramped space, waiting for the perfect moment to use his unique techniques. He quickly defeated the zombies. While practicing his martial arts, he also kept his puppets busy with another task. He commanded his puppets to search for supplies, while simultaneously tracking the movements of any evolved zombies in the area. He was actively looking for those difficult monsters, though he knew better than to provoke them without sufficient strength. Compared to the red horror he saw before, the hulking brutes and agile types were relatively easier to handle. Through several days of exploration, he discovered that those precious crystals mostly formed within the brains of evolved zombies. Meanwhile, in the 7th-floor bedroom, little Enro had progressed from being exhausted by moving a single needle to being able to levitate her tiny infant body a few centimeters. For humans, flight is perhaps the ultimate dream. While Ruashua couldn't fully fly just yet, her constant and tireless cultivation was finally starting to pay off. She now possessed a small measure of self-defense. To be honest, she had no idea how valuable her gift truly was. If the large survivor camps knew an infant could levitate her own body, they would surely flock to recruit her. Such an achievement was simply staggering. After finishing his training, he used his puppets to clear away the dismantled zombies. Just as he prepared to go upstairs to feed little Chi-Chi, the puppet searching for resources sent back a new discovery. Not far away, an agile-type zombie with a lean frame and incredible speed was spotted on the hunt. It was chasing a gaunt, malnourished human survivor. This poor soul had run out of food and was forced to venture out. Unfortunately, he had crossed paths with the very evolved zombie our protagonist had been searching for. The agile zombie used its claws to hook into a car door, performing a perfect drift before catching and killing the survivor. Watching this scene, he realized his opportunity had arrived. Ever since he felt the power surge from the first crystal, his desire to grow stronger had become an obsession. He immediately ordered his puppets to follow and monitor the agile zombie. He left one puppet to monitor the creature's movements while dispatching 4 others, armed and ready, to the scene. Once the 5 puppets gathered, he had them disguise themselves as ordinary zombies, slowly closing in from a semi-encircled position. The agile zombie was still busy feasting on human flesh, completely unaware of the trap being laid around it. He knew that with its incredible speed, a reckless frontal assault would likely result in his entire puppet squad being wiped out. When the distance closed to just 10 meters, he gave the command, and the 5 puppets launched a sudden, coordinated charge. The agile zombie relied on its lightning-fast reflexes to dodge the majority of the initial strikes, moving with unnatural grace. However, his pincer strategy worked. The creature's arm and back were slashed, though one puppet's axe became lodged in its ribs. In a fit of rage, the agile zombie tore that puppet's head apart, but he immediately sent 2 more to strike from the front. This distraction was calculated to draw the monster's focus, allowing the remaining puppets to resume their relentless assault from the shadows. While the agile zombie managed to push back the frontal attackers, it couldn't avoid a devastating horizontal slash to its waist. A large chunk of flesh was torn away, and the wounded beast erupted in a burst of speed, decapitating another of his puppets. Yet the remaining 3 puppets surged forward instantly, and the agile zombie finally found itself unable to dodge the dense flurry of axes. The hunt was over. Once the agile zombie was finally slain, he commanded the surviving puppets to extract the precious crystal. After the crystal was cut from the fallen creature, the puppets moved quickly to return to the safety of the residential complex. Back at the base, he stationed his puppets at the entrance and took the crystal up to the 6th floor for inspection. This crystal was white with a distinct red tint, just like the previous one, suggesting the zombie had also consumed others of its kind. He swallowed the crystal, and once again, we see that surge of vast energy sweeping through his entire body. After the process finished, his strength had grown significantly. He could now control 10 zombies at a distance of 3,000 meters. Fueled by the excitement of his new power, he carefully selected 4 specialized zombies from the surrounding hordes to serve him. He equipped them with protective gear, forming a formidable and imposing squad of elite zombie puppets. Looking at this small squad, he felt a surge of confidence, already imagining himself leading a massive army of the undead. He began to plan how his telekinesis and puppet legion would conquer the surrounding lands, favoring a strategy of overwhelming numbers. Yet, he hadn't forgotten the terrifying blood-colored monster in Building 1. After today's clash, that creature seemed even more daunting. Even with his sturdy stone-like puppets, he knew too little about the monster to guarantee a victory in a direct confrontation. He decided to wait a few days before sending puppets to scout its true strength, as the creature was a ticking time bomb. To ease his mind over the next 3 days, he set to work transforming the 6th floor into a personal training room. Through combat practice, he realized his physical attributes had improved across the board, and he nodded in quiet satisfaction at his new body. This was what a true survivor of the apocalypse should look like. Once training ended, he commanded his puppets to clean the area. After washing away the blood, he returned to the 7th floor to feed little Chi-Chi, watching the small child's face carefully. As he fed her and watched her innocent smile, he couldn't help but grin back. The little one's appetite was certainly growing. He used scavenged toys to amuse Chi-Chi, while Yun Ruashua watched her zombie father's clumsy attempts at play with a blank stare. To be honest, she was quite speechless, although she appeared to be a helpless infant on the outside. Deep down, she was a mature, calm, and decisive empress who had once ruled with an iron fist. Still, recognizing her zombie father's good intentions, she forced a smile, which only encouraged him to try even harder. Ruashiwe's eyelid twitched at his persistence, but she decided to treat this as a way to train her own mental fortitude. After their playtime, he decided it was finally time to test the strength of the blood-colored monster in Building 1. He selected several tall, well-built puppets from the horde and equipped them with heavy fire axes. They looked imposing, but he felt they needed more, so he led them to a nearby electric scooter shop on the corner. After breaking in, he fitted each puppet with a full-face motorcycle helmet, knowing the head is a zombie's only fatal weakness. Even if their bodies were torn apart, as long as their heads remained intact, they could still swing an axe at the enemy. With everything ready, we see him take remote control of this newly outfitted zombie squad as they march toward Building 1. Since his telekinetic range now reached 3,000 meters, and knowing he wasn't quite ready for a close-quarters brawl, Hao chose to stay safely in Building 5, commanding his squad to cautiously inspect every room and corner from the ground floor up. He kept a sharp eye on the ceilings to prevent an ambush from the wall-crawling monster, and soon, they finished searching 4 floors. There was still no sign of the blood-colored creature, but they had no idea it was clinging to a blind spot on the 5th floor like a spider. As the puppets made their way up the stairs, the monster suddenly launched its attack. With a single strike, it sent the puppet nearest the door flying, though luckily, the helmet saved it from instant death. Hao quickly commanded the group to counterattack, swinging their fire axes with everything they had. If Yun Ruashua had been there, she would have recognized this creature instantly as a sky lion zombie, a terrifying evolved form. In her past life, these creatures caused massive casualties early in the apocalypse. Now, the enraged sky lion lashed out with lightning-fast claws. It sent several more puppets flying, but under Hao's absolute control, they ignored their injuries and pressed forward. They grabbed onto its claws with a death grip, allowing the other puppets to bring their axes down toward its head. The sky lion found itself surrounded, and though it managed to leap away, it was still struck several times in the process. Hao attempted to have multiple puppets strike the exact same spot repeatedly, focusing his mental energy on the task. Finally, 3 of his puppets worked together to hack off one of the sky lion's arms, forcing the wounded beast onto the ceiling. He ordered his puppets to throw their axes in a desperate attempt to finish it, but the sky lion was simply too fast. Between the limited strength of these low-level puppets and the difficulty of aiming from a distance, the accuracy dropped significantly. The sky lion shattered a window and escaped onto the outer wall, vanishing from sight in the blink of an eye. Hao cursed himself for underestimating its power. Despite his preparation, the creature had managed to slip away. This sky lion was incredibly agile, capable of moving across the building's exterior as if it were flat ground. Hao realized this escape might lead to a vengeful counterattack, though he felt relieved that his decision to use helmets had at least minimized his losses. His primary concern now was that blood-colored monster. If it ever managed to sneak into Building 5, the consequences would be disastrous. If it discovered the little one and climbed up the exterior wall, he knew his current defenses would be completely bypassed. He quickly pushed his emotions aside to draft a defense plan, stationing 3 heavily armed wall-crasher puppets to patrol Building 5. This way, even if the creature tried to slip in quietly, he would receive an immediate warning through his mental link. Meanwhile, he sent his other puppets to hunt for more evolved zombies, hoping to find more crystals to further increase his strength. He had been quite excited after absorbing 2 crystals, but this crimson monster reminded him that he was still a relatively small fish in a very dangerous pond. We return to the 7th floor, where Yun Ruashua is currently in her bedroom, making 2 dolls dance through the air with her mind. As a former empress, she didn't actually have much interest in such toys. To be perfectly honest, they were a bit beneath her. However, not wanting Hao's kindness to go to waste, she found that practicing her telekinesis with the dolls was actually quite effective. Sensing that he had returned, Ruashua immediately pulled the dolls into a hug, pretending to be an ordinary child again. Seeing her playing happily instantly soothed Hao's frayed nerves. He looked at her, thinking of how dark and broken their world had become. He truly hoped that as she grew up, she wouldn't lose heart and that she could remain exactly as she was in this moment. He wanted her to grow up without a single care in the world, harboring a quiet wish that they could both survive this together. As he looked at the bedroom window, he decided it was a vulnerability that needed to be addressed immediately. He went out and returned with wooden boards and nails to seal the window, while Ruashua watched her zombie father with a look of confusion. She hadn't gone outside much lately anyway, but seeing him board up the windows seemed like a bit of an overreaction. She wondered if her zombie father had realized how powerful the evolved monsters were and was now simply hiding from the chaos outside. To her, that seemed like the most logical explanation. It appeared her zombie father was actually a bit of a coward, but she had overlooked the most important detail, that everything he was doing was solely to keep her safe. And we must remember that after the blood moon, quite a few evolved humans began to emerge among the survivors. At first, they all fled in panic from the ordinary zombies, but as time went on, things began to change. Even ordinary humans eventually learned how to hunt these low-level zombies with relative ease. After a while, Hao finally finished reinforcing the window, making sure to leave small gaps for light and ventilation. He wanted to ensure their defense without making Ruashue's environment too depressing, while buying himself time to react to that crimson monster. Over the next 3 days, though the monster didn't appear, he kept his puppets patrolling Building 5. He didn't dare let his guard down, and suddenly, he felt a sharp ripple of mental energy through his link. One of his puppets had encountered a group of human survivors while searching for supplies in a shop 2 streets away. The survivors initially thought it was just a normal zombie, but they were terrified when the puppet turned to face them. One particularly strong man named Taiju didn't hesitate. He grabbed a metal pipe and charged straight at the puppet. Hao took direct control, using a fire axe to fight back, but the moment they clashed, he was genuinely surprised. He had specifically chosen puppets with strong physiques, and naturally, a puppet's strength is usually greater than a human's. To be perfectly honest, he expected an easy win, given that his puppets were physically superior to any ordinary person. However, he hadn't expected Taiju to possess such immense strength. The force vibrating through the metal pipe was staggering. He felt the puppet's arm go numb as Taiju's incredible power sent the fire axe flying right out of its hands. With a single follow-up swing, Taiju crushed the puppet's head, though he looked down at the body with a hint of confusion. He remarked to himself that the world was getting truly absurd if even the zombies were starting to use weapons. He wondered if this was some new type of evolved zombie, but he didn't dwell on the thought for very long. He quickly called his companions to move the supplies, fearing the noise might attract more evolved monsters. As they scavenged, his friends praised him, knowing they never would have found this much food without Brother Tieju's protection. And why wouldn't they? To them, an evolved zombie was nothing compared to Brother Tieju's divine strength. One swing of his club was all it took. After all, in order to keep a powerful protector in this post-apocalyptic world, everyone had to keep a smile on their faces and flatter him. The man known as Taiju was clearly quite pleased with himself, soaking in the compliments of his companions with visible pride. Hao, meanwhile, was genuinely surprised to encounter human survivors after more than a month, especially one as physically powerful as this Taiju. He suspected the man might be an evolved human. After all, it was rare for an ordinary person to possess such overwhelming strength. Given the complexity of human nature and their inherent cunning, he began to worry that his supplies might be targeted by these survivors. To ensure his own safety and that of little Ruashua, he decided to stop sending his puppets into that particular area. After this brief encounter with the survivors, a few more days passed by in the blink of an eye. We see that he had finally stopped gathering supplies, mostly because his puppets had been almost too efficient at their jobs. Every single room in Building 5 was now overflowing, packed to the ceiling with a vast variety of essential goods. At the same time, Ruashua had been busy using her telekinetic powers to practice crawling across her bedroom bed. As her control over her body grew more precise, her speed across the mattress increased significantly. Eventually, with the help of her telekinesis, she actually learned to walk, and that was exactly when Hao happened to walk in. Seeing this scene, his jaw practically hit the floor. The little girl was only a few months old, yet here she was, standing upright. His initial shock soon turned into pure joy. Though he wanted her to adapt to this world, he never expected her to walk so soon. He carried Ruashua to the living room, thinking the flat, open floor would be a much better place for her to practice her new skill. Ruashua adapted quickly using her powers, but since her physical strength was limited, it took a great deal of mental energy to stay balanced. After practicing for a short while, she had to stop. Assuming she was simply tired, Hao gently placed her on the sofa to rest. Afterward, he took his steel machete to the balcony to practice his forms, his body having been fully purified after consuming the golden core. As he swung the heavy blade through the air, it let out a sharp, whistling sound, a testament to his own growing power. His current practice was based entirely on vague memories of martial arts from his past life, mimicking simple patterns as best he could. As he swung the machete, Hao felt that as long as he grew strong enough, even a simple brick could become a lethal weapon. Watching from the side, Ruashua was genuinely surprised to see that he was actually trying to improve his combat strength. She still viewed him as an ordinary zombie, albeit one with human consciousness and a rare ability to use weapons. In her eyes, this gave him a distinct advantage over other low-level zombies, but it was hardly enough for what was coming. Having been a powerful empress in her previous life, Roashua possessed a wealth of experience in actual combat and weapon mastery. To be honest, she found his blade techniques to be utterly amateurish, the kind that would fail against any opponent with real skill. She worried that a true warrior could kill her zombie father in an instant, while Hao, noticing her gaze, completely misunderstood her. Thinking she was impressed by his skills, he felt a surge of pride and began to swing the blade with even more enthusiasm. Over the next few days, we see him letting little Roashua move freely around the living room on the 6th floor. This area was far more spacious and bright than the 7th floor bedroom, which had its windows boarded up for safety. While Hao practiced his blade forms and hand-to-hand combat on the balcony, Roashua practiced walking upright in the living room. She also secretly trained her telekinesis. With his constant company, the little girl's steps became steadier and more confident every day. It was nothing short of a miracle, really, and Hao himself felt his own physical power reaching new heights. Since the blood mutation, zombies and beasts were evolving at a terrifying rate, leaving little room for ordinary zombies to survive. He knew he had to grow stronger as quickly as possible, if only to ensure he wouldn't be a burden in this dying world. But just as they were both focused on their training, a sudden, furious roar echoed from outside the building. His instincts flared, and he immediately switched to the vision of his zombie gulls to see two mutated zombies locked in a fierce battle. One was a massive, tank-like zombie nearly 8 feet tall, its fists swinging with enough force to create audible gusts of wind. The sheer power on display was enough to make anyone hesitate, but Hao began summoning all his gulls as he headed downstairs. We see a figure named Shirtu, fully armed and alert, quietly creeping toward the greenbelt area. After a long and brutal struggle, both zombies were exhausted, and the blood-colored monster finally tore an arm from the tank zombie. The tank zombie eventually collapsed and died, leaving the blood-colored monster with a hollow victory just as it prepared to take the core. Suddenly, Hao's squad of zombie gulls swarmed the area, ignoring the monster's furious roars as it tried to drive them away. His controlled gulls were completely unaffected by the creature's pressure, and Shirtu's gulls began mindlessly hacking away with fire axes. The open ground stripped the monster of its ability to climb and leap, leaving it trapped and surrounded the moment they met. With both evolution cores secured, Hao was overjoyed and immediately commanded the gulls to return to the residential complex. These two cores had turned mostly red, a clear sign that these creatures had already devoured many of their own kind. Back on the 3rd floor, he couldn't wait to swallow both cores at once, feeling an energy surge far greater than anything before. But the most vital change was in his consciousness. He couldn't help but wonder why his zombie father couldn't have waited a bit longer. Just as he was lost in that moment of grief, the door lock clicked, and Roashua looked up with a sudden, bright smile on her face. She hopped down from the sofa and ran toward him with wobbly, uncertain steps, calling out the word, "Papa." Hao felt as if he'd been struck by lightning and froze in place. The little girl had actually learned to speak. Having lived 2 lives without even having a girlfriend, he felt a strange wave of emotion, almost wishing he hadn't met her yet. He told himself he didn't want to meet her like this, the thought echoing through his mind over and over again. It was a heavy realization to bear, repeating in his head as he looked at the child he was now protecting. The weight of the situation was almost too much for him to handle in that silent room. Once Roashua had her fill, she refused to drink any more formula, opening her mouth to reveal 2 rows of tiny, developing teeth. She was making it very clear she was done with milk, and for a moment, he could only stare at those little teeth in surprise. He felt a bit embarrassed, realizing that even a small child seemed to understand the situation better than he did. He hurried to the 6th floor to cook some rice porridge, mixing it with milk powder to make a paste, which the little one eagerly began to eat herself. She even seemed to find him a bit clumsy, looking at him as if to say she'd rather just handle the spoon on her own. Watching her eat so happily, Hao couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. His little chick was finally growing up. He had been wondering if he could control evolved zombies, and soon enough, a perfect opportunity presented itself. One of his scouts spotted a lone tank-type, evolved zombie kilometers away, so Hao disguised himself as a common zombie and slowly approached. He released his telekinesis within 100 meters, noting that the mental defenses of an evolved zombie were far stronger than the average type. There was a clear sense of resistance, but his newly evolved mental power proved to be even more formidable. He quickly broke through its defenses, successfully turning it into a puppet and naming the massive creature cannon. This fellow was incredibly robust with arms like thick coils, so Hao found 2 heavy iron hammers from a hardware store for him to wield. When Cannon swung them, the wind whistled. Standing at the complex entrance, he looked exactly like a legendary guardian god. With Cannon on guard, his sense of security skyrocketed, and shortly after, he subdued an agile evolved zombie he named Lightning. Lightning was exceptionally fast and skilled with dual blades, perfectly compensating for Cannon's lack of speed. With 1 for offense and 1 for defense, plus 20 ordinary puppets, he felt he could walk through this apocalypse with total confidence. Meanwhile, while searching for supplies, Cannon encountered a mutated giant dog nearly 2 meters in length. The beast was truly massive, stretching nearly 2 meters long and radiating a primal, predatory energy. It moved with a terrifying speed that would have spelled certain death for any ordinary survivor caught in its path. Before the creature could strike, Hao issued a silent command, and Cannon immediately went on the offensive with his great iron hammers. The sheer force of the strike was enough to crush anything in its way, targeting the beast's most vulnerable characteristics. The impact sent the giant dog reeling, and we see the tide of the battle shift as Hao's forces closed in. He watched the confrontation unfold, ready to exert his will and ensure this new threat was dealt with permanently. And so, our protagonist's power continued to grow, reaching levels he had never previously imagined. While his abilities reached new heights, Yun Ruoxue remained unaware, and she took advantage of his absence to sneak downstairs and investigate. To her utter shock, she found that the entire building, from the 3rd to the 6th floor, was packed with supplies and mountains of powdered milk. Bottled water was stacked to the ceiling alongside massive amounts of baby products and food. It was, quite frankly, a staggering sight. She marveled at how much her zombie father had managed to hoard, a discovery that only reinforced her private theories about him. She reasoned that an ordinary zombie could never move this much cargo, leading her to guess he possessed some sort of earth-tunneling ability. She imagined him moving swiftly underground to transport goods, and seeing Cannon guarding the entrance with his twin hammers only confirmed her suspicions. She convinced herself that her father must be using that tunneling power to slip in and out of the building undetected. In reality, Cannon was merely a puppet under Hao's control, but Ruoxue didn't know that. She quietly resolved to grow strong enough to help him. Her plan was to eventually take down the big fellow herself, clearing any obstacles in her father's path. She even found some property documents nearby. From those papers, she learned they were in Jianghai City, and she began searching her memories of the previous timeline for any useful information. She recalled 2 famous powerhouses from Jianghai, a female officer with the ability to resurrect 9 times, known as the 9-Death Demon Cop. The other legendary figure was a mutated white bear that had gained absolute mastery over the power of lightning. Suddenly, we see a military helicopter fly over the city, dropping thousands of flyers announcing that the military had established a perimeter. Hao glanced at a flyer before tossing it aside. As a zombie, a human survivor base held absolutely no interest for him. Ruoxue simply gave a cold laugh as she crumpled her flyer into a ball, having spent her previous life inside such survivor bases. She knew those places were filled with darkness and injustice, and she much preferred staying with her zombie father over those scheming humans. While Hao continued to build his strength, a female police officer named Su Mooching from a nearby station was approaching the area. She and her colleagues had come to the Sunshine Complex looking for a truck to evacuate survivors, but they found their path blocked at the entrance. There they encountered Cannon. Mooching picked up a stone and threw it at him to draw him away, but the massive guardian didn't even flinch. She then drew her pistol and fired a shot, which immediately infuriated Hao. Regardless of her motives, anyone daring to fire at his puppet was asking for trouble. He decided there was only one path for her, death. Hao controlled Cannon to block the bullet with a hammer before swinging his massive arm with incredible force. He hurled the giant hammer directly at Su Mooching. She never expected a zombie to use a projectile attack, and, unable to dodge in time, she was struck head-on. She was killed instantly. The other officers who had entered the complex didn't fare any better, as Hao's zombie puppets quickly eliminated every single one of them. After the skirmish, Hao moved in to scavenge what he could, seizing several police pistols and a fresh supply of ammunition from their bodies. However, as late night fell, something truly bizarre occurred. We see Su Mooching's corpse suddenly begin to glow with a crimson light, and then she simply stood back up. Her broken bones and mangled body were completely restored, and her strength seemed to have doubled. Hao, watching this through Cannon's eyes, was stunned. He was utterly bewildered, wondering if he was seeing a ghost. This officer had literally come back from the dead, though Mooching herself looked just as confused by it. Upon checking her body, she found that not a single scar remained. To her surprise, both her strength and speed had increased significantly. She realized then that she was likely an evolver with the rare ability to resurrect. On the following day, Mooching returned to the complex once again. This time, she brought an even larger squad of fully armed officers. Hao's anger flared. He felt he had already shown her mercy once by letting her die quickly. He couldn't believe she was reckless enough to return, so this time, he commanded 3 evolved zombies to surround and attack her simultaneously. But after her resurrection, Mooching's power had surged so much that she was able to maneuver through the 3 zombies' attacks with ease. Hao even ordered his marksman puppet to open fire, yet she managed to dodge most of the bullets. Eventually, however, he found an opening and killed her a second time. At this point, Hao was speechless, dying only to resurrect and become stronger. To make matters worse, he sensed a hidden evolver was also at play. Someone was secretly assisting Mooching. Every time Hao's attacks were about to land, they would mysteriously freeze for a split second as if time itself had paused. He even saw bullets curve in midair. As it turns out, the mysterious figure hiding in the shadows was none other than his own daughter, Ruoxue. Through her own observations, she had deduced that a zombie king was likely lurking in the complex, controlling the others from the dark. Using a secret telepathic technique, she contacted Mooching and disguised herself as a mysterious expert known only as the Unseen One. Her plan was to team up and slay the zombie king. Mooching, believing she had found a powerful ally, readily agreed to the cooperation as the night of the operation arrived. We see Su Mooching drawing the massive cannon away at the entrance, successfully breaking into the complex, only to be blocked by Hao himself in front of Building 5. To protect little Chi-Chi on the 7th floor, Hao pulled all his zombie puppets back to the building, stepping forward with a machete in a fit of absolute rage. Every strike he dealt was ruthless and lethal, showing none of his usual gentleness, while Ruashua watched secretly from the 2nd floor of Building 1. Using her time manipulation powers, she repeatedly blocked Hao's fatal blows, though she only intervened to keep Mooching from being killed. She made sure Mooching couldn't land a scratch on Hao either, leaving the officer utterly bewildered as to whose side this invisible ally was actually on. Whenever Mooching tried to attack this specific zombie, she was stopped. Ruashua sent her a single telepathic message: "You cannot touch this one." The battle grew increasingly desperate and fierce as Mooching fought to storm Building 5, but Hao stood his ground like an immovable wall. He let out one agonizing roar after another, his fury at protecting his loved one so intense it felt as if the temperature in the complex was dropping. It was at this precise moment that Ruashua finally glimpsed the truth, as Mooching made her desperate charge toward the building. Every zombie in the complex began swarming toward Building 5. They weren't protecting some random zombie king. They were protecting the person on the 7th floor. And the one who had issued the command for the horde to defend that person at all costs was none other than her own zombie father. Could it be that her father was the zombie king? In this single moment, every confusing clue finally began to click into place. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The zombie father she loved was indeed the very zombie king she had been tracking. As all the pieces of the puzzle connected, she understood that the target she had intended to hunt was the man who had been raising her. She felt incredibly foolish, realizing she had almost harvested her own father's core just to feed it back to him. Once she understood, she immediately stopped assisting Mooching. Without that secret support, the officer instantly lost her advantage and fell into a losing position. Hao didn't hold back, using 3 evolved zombies alongside his own body to surround her, treating her like a literal punching bag. Mooching's final thought before losing consciousness was a bitter one. Her invisible ally had completely betrayed her. After Hao knocked her out, he wrote a note and left it for her: "Stay alive. If you die, everyone at the police station will be buried with you." After the chaos, he even found a learning machine and flashcards for little Chi-Chi, whose growth was proceeding at a truly remarkable pace. Little Chi-Chi was already learning to read, write, and do arithmetic, making Hao feel that his daughter was truly a gifted child of the earth. Meanwhile, Ruashua pretended to follow along with the learning machine, mimicking basic words while feeling an immense internal struggle. In her past life, she had been a graduate student at a prestigious university, and now she was forced to relearn basic toddler education. At the same time, she took advantage of Hao's outings to sneak downstairs and chat with Mooching. Surprisingly, the two women got along quite well. Mooching had absolutely no guard up against this innocent and adorable little girl, and she ended up sharing almost all of her personal information. Ruashua, however, was secretly calculating how to win over this 9-death demonic tool, knowing Mooching had the potential to reach the Earth realm. Securing such an ally would be a massive advantage, and when Hao noticed Chi-Chi liked talking to Mooching, he didn't actually mind. He told himself it was a good thing for the little one to have a normal human to communicate with, though he remained cautious. He didn't oppose Chi-Chi's chats with Mooching, as having a human around for the little girl to talk to was a positive development. However, he always made sure Mooching's chains were locked tight and ordered Lightning One to watch her constantly. Then, one day, everything changed. Our story takes a turn when a scout puppet returns with news. A never-before-seen Tier 2 tyrant zombie had appeared on a distant street. This zombie's arms had completely transformed into pure muscle, giving it levels of strength and speed that were utterly terrifying. A human evolver was being pursued and was fleeing in total desperation. It was Tai Zhu, who had previously clashed with Hao's puppets. The tyrant zombie's wounds were actually healing automatically, making Tai Zhu's repeated blade strikes feel completely useless. Tai Zhu only barely escaped with his life by ducking into a narrow alleyway. Watching this, Hao realized this tyrant was far too powerful. A head-on confrontation was out of the question, but he had a better plan. He used lightning to lure the tyrant toward the police station. Mooching happened to be returning from a supply run and spotted the tyrant. Without a second thought, she moved to intercept it. She drew its attention to protect the people at the station. As the saying goes, when two tigers fight, the clever hunter wins. Realizing she couldn't win the brawl, she lured it to a gas station and blew up the fuel tanks, engulfing the area in a massive inferno. The tyrant struggled out of the sea of fire, charred black and clinging to life, though its injuries were now exceptionally severe. Hao immediately took control of Air Pang and Lightning, sending them charging toward the heavily wounded tyrant. The creature couldn't withstand the relentless strikes of Air Pang's massive steel club, and it was soon beaten into the ground. Lightning seized the opening to finish it off with his steel blades, and Hao was overjoyed to retrieve a Tier 2 core. However, he didn't rush to consume it this time. First, he prepared dinner for little Chi-Chi and reinforced the perimeter defenses. Only then did he head to Building 4 to swallow the core, feeling a surge of energy as he finished Chi-Chi's meal. After finalizing the security, he consumed the core in Building 4, and the immense power allowed him to successfully break through to Tier 3. We see his physical condition undergo a qualitative leap, reaching a level of strength he had never felt before. He could now outpace the agile Lightning in speed and even push back the tank-like Depang in a head-on clash. Finally, he felt like a true survivor of the apocalypse. Shortly after reaching Tier 3, he managed to subdue another creature. This was a Tier 2 tank zombie as large as a small car, which he named Air Pang and equipped with a 1-ton metal staff. A single swing from Air Pang could crush a car into scrap metal or hurl the staff right through a concrete wall. With Air Pang guarding the main gate, even the evolved zombies didn't dare approach the complex. Meanwhile, something else was brewing. Secretly, Ruashue had also broken through to Tier 3, and her telekinetic powers had grown significantly stronger after the advancement. She could now launch iron nails at incredible speeds, which, combined with her time manipulation, allowed her to take lives silently. In the grand scheme of this dying world, she had already become one of the top powerhouses among humanity. One day, Hao found a manual for the blood-kill blade technique at his feet, assuming some mysterious master had left it for him. He had no idea, of course, that Ruashua had secretly written it in her notebook and tossed it his way. The technique used blood as a catalyst. Once mastered, one's own killing intent became the world's sharpest blade, and Hao's progress was rapid. His combat effectiveness improved drastically, but the peace was short-lived when a 5-person team of evolvers arrived. Coming from a survivor base to scavenge supplies in Shanghai City, they noticed the area around Sunshine Apartment had been picked clean. Having traveled from the survivor base to Shanghai City for supplies, they noticed the area around Sunshine Apartment was completely picked clean. By tracking the puppets moving the goods, they found the complex and climbed the walls at night, unaware that the moment they landed, our army of puppets had already surrounded them, and the evolved zombie Lightning No. 2 instantly cut down one of the intruders. Depang's twin hammers sent 2 melee-type evolvers flying backward, and amidst the chaos, Hao decided to step in personally. With a single horizontal slash from his newly mastered blood-kill blade technique, he cut the last fleeing survivor clean in half. After searching the bodies, he found IDs from a survivor base and realized human factions were developing much faster than he imagined. Knowing Sunshine Apartment would eventually be exposed, he decided to move to the open spaces of Qingshui Farm on the city's outskirts. One cannot stay locked in a concrete jungle forever. Chi-Chi needed sunlight, fresh air, and fresh vegetables, especially the vegetables. It pained him to think the little girl's diet had been so limited for so long, consisting only of milk powder, fried rice, and porridge. Without a single green leaf in sight, he planned to use his puppets at the farm to clear the fields and start planting. He wanted Chi-Chi to finally eat fresh produce, but before leaving, there was one more matter to handle: Su Muqing. Her resurrection ability was too troublesome to kill or keep, so he decided that since they were leaving, he would simply let her go. They would never meet again. He told Chi-Chi his decision, and she nodded before asking if the older sister would want to come with them. Deep down, Hao knew that given Muqing's stubborn personality, she would never agree to leave her post. She couldn't abandon the survivors at the police station. Meanwhile, Ruashua took advantage of a moment when Hao wasn't looking. She secretly slipped a note into Muqing's hand that read Qingshui Farm. Before leaving, Muqing turned to Ruashua with a question. She asked if Ruashua still remembered their promise, and Ruashua replied with a smile that if a day ever comes, where she finds that this world is not nearly as beautiful as she had imagined it to be, and she no longer wishes to protect everyone else, she should remember to come and protect her instead. As Muqing limped back to the police station, she was met with a sight that shattered her. The very survivors she had risked everything to protect. They had descended into cannibalistic monsters, killing every officer who refused to join them, and even Su Muqing herself. But here we see her third resurrection, her power surging as she personally executed every last cannibal without a shred of mercy. The last young man knelt, begging for his life, claiming he was a good person who only wanted to survive. Yes, a likely story. As she turned to walk away, the click of a pistol hammer echoed. She lunged back like lightning, shattering his ribs with a single blow. She wondered why they had to lie to her, her heart turning to ash as she recalled Ruashue's haunting words. What if these people simply weren't worth protecting? It was a chilling thought, but a necessary one. Looking at the note for Qingshui Farm, she questioned if these wretched beasts deserved her sacrifice at all. With one final look at the station she had once sworn to serve, she turned and vanished into the darkness of the night. On the day of the move, a massive fleet of heavy trucks rolled out from Sunshine Apartment in a grand procession. At the wheels sat a row of zombie drivers, followed closely by a growing legion of the undead. As the heavy trucks thundered out of the complex, those same undead drivers kept their eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. Behind them followed a fully armed army of puppets, leaving the survivors along the route in a state of absolute shock. One scavenger, busy searching a nearby shop for supplies, watched the heavy trucks roar past in total disbelief. Seeing the rotting faces of zombies in the driver's seats, he could only wonder if he had finally lost his mind. It turns out zombies can drive trucks now, which, naturally, attracted even more of the undead to the noise of the convoy. Hao didn't mind. He simply used his telekinesis to recruit them all, and so, our army grew even larger as they traveled. But as they neared the city zoo, a massive, golden tier, 2 mutant pythons suddenly slithered out to block the entire street. It was over 20 meters long, its scales shimmering with a strange, metallic golden luster in the light. After 2 scout puppets were swallowed whole, Hao ordered Air Pang to the front, armed with a massive steel club. A heavy blow to the python's head left it dazed, while the Pang and the other tanks moved in to seal off its escape. The agile zombies swarmed forward immediately, using their steel blades to relentlessly slash at the python's massive body. At the critical moment, a tyrant zombie leaped from a high building, its claws piercing the beast's vital spot to tear open a massive wound. Air Pang followed up with a heavy blow that crushed the python's skull. After taking the Tier 2 core, Hao decided to let Air Pang devour the carcass. Cores below Tier 3 were no longer useful to him, but they could make his puppet stronger, and quality always matters more than quantity. His goal was clear. He intended to build an elite force composed entirely of high-level evolved zombies. Ruashua looked at the massive body of the giant python, her eyes shining with a look of pure, unadulterated delight. "Dad, I want to eat snake meat," she pleaded. The little girl was tired of milk powder and was nearly ready to gag on fried rice. Seeing such a massive snake was simply too much for her to resist. "Dad, I really want to eat snake meat." She had been living on milk powder and fried rice for so long that she could hardly look away from the potential feast. However, Hao wasn't sure if humans could safely eat mutant meat, so he decided to wait until he could find a human test subject. "I'll cook it for you once I'm sure it's safe," he promised. Ruashua was a bit disappointed, but she understood her father's caution. Deep down, he knew mutant meat was actually quite nourishing, but he couldn't explain how he knew. And so, the convoy moved on. The tall buildings slowly vanished, replaced by the open, desolate countryside. Hao checked the map one more time. They would reach Qingshui Farm in about 10 minutes. Above them, the setting sun stained the sky a deep, bloody red. He watched the scenery receding through the window, then looked over at little Chi-Chi, who was quietly staring at the world outside. The afterglow of the sunset reflected in the little one's eyes. This was the first time since his rebirth that he had seen this. It was his very first time leaving Sunshine Apartment to see what had become of the world outside. But no matter what the world became, as long as Chi-Chi was by his side, everything had meaning. There, on the distant horizon, the vast silhouette of a farm appeared through the sunset. That was to be their new home, Qingshui Farm. Meanwhile, dozens of kilometers behind them in the ruins of Jianghai City, a figure radiating a terrifying aura slowly emerged. The figure followed the tire tracks with chilling precision. The once gentle and kind gaze of Su Muqing had completely vanished. In its place was a look of cold determination, though a faint smile touched his lips when he remembered the little girl with her milk bottle. That small, involuntary warmth remained as the sign for the farm's main gate finally came into view. Flanking the heavy steel gates were fences made of wooden stakes and barbed wire, adorned with ominous high-voltage warning signs. We see marks where the wire had been forcibly breached, but from his seat in the truck, Hao surveyed the farm with genuine satisfaction. Qingshui Farm was secluded and unlikely to attract unwanted attention, offering far more space for him and Chi-Chi than the apartment ever could. It was the perfect staging ground for his massive puppet army, and more importantly, a much healthier environment for a child to grow up in. "Dad, are we there yet?" Ruashua asked, her voice breaking the silence just as they approached the perimeter. Suddenly, the sounds of fighting and animalistic roars echoed from within the farm, prompting Hao to send his puppets deep into the livestock area. There, he discovered a massive, mutated bull, and quite strangely, one of his puppets was caught right on the barbed wire fence. It was tangled in the wire, struggling against the metal barbs that lined the perimeter of the enclosure. The puppet remained stuck fast, its movements restricted by the sharp coils of the fence as the chaos unfolded nearby. It thrashed against the wire repeatedly, but the metal held firm. And then, the situation shifted once more. As the sounds of the struggle grew louder, Hao commanded his puppets to investigate the source of the noise near the poultry pens. He found a giant, mutated ox, but the most absurd part was that this creature had grown something quite unexpected. It possessed fangs more terrifying than those of a lion or tiger, which it was using to feast upon the carcass of an unknown animal. In this new world, even the cattle had turned into carnivores. Upon spotting the puppets, the giant ox charged without a second thought. This beast had already reached Tier 2 status, making it far too powerful for a common puppet to handle alone. Hao deployed Air Pang and Tyrant 1 to intercept. Air Pang landed a heavy blow to the ox's head, leaving the beast dazed and seeing stars. Tyrant 1 seized the opening to tear a massive wound with its claws, though the ox's hide proved to be incredibly thick. Tyrant 1 seized the opening, its sharp claws tearing a massive wound into the beast's side. The ox's hide had evolved to be incredibly tough, but since it lacked the sense to dodge, it finally collapsed after a few more rounds. Tyrant's claws eventually pierced through its skull, extracting a Tier 2 orange-yellow core that was pulsing with energy. After dealing with the ox, the search continued. Near the western fish pond, Hao noticed a very wide crawling trail along the bank. As he maneuvered a puppet closer to the water's edge, a giant snapping turtle suddenly lunged out from the depths. With one bite, it snapped the puppet's ankle. Its shell was so incredibly hard that the puppet's counterpunch actually recoiled with violent force. The impact was enough to snap the puppet's wrist, so Hao decided against killing it for now, simply stationing 2 puppets to keep it from leaving the water. They say these creatures live for thousands of years. Once he confirmed the meat was safe, it would make a fine tonic for Chi-Chi's health. After scouring the farm twice over to ensure it was safe, Hao began a massive, systematic cleanup of the entire property. Only when the residential area was sparkling and new did he finally take Chi-Chi by the hand and lead her into the farm. She looked around, wondering if this was truly to be their new home, and to be honest, it looked quite promising. Ruoxue surveyed her surroundings with eyes full of anticipation, while Hao's primary focus remained, as always, on the matter of security. Pang stood guard at the south gate with his heavy club, while Lightning 1, 2, and 3 joined the other squads to watch the remaining perimeters. With Pang and Tyrant 1 providing close-range protection for Chi-Chi, the entire farm was transformed into an impregnable fortress. Watching Chi-Chi sleep peacefully, Hao felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing she could finally rest easy here at Qingshui Farm. When Chi-Chi woke the next morning, breakfast was already prepared, and a plate of fresh fruit sat waiting on the table. There were still plenty of fruits hanging in the orchard to the north, and Chi-Chi's eyes lit up the moment she saw them. She seemed almost intoxicated by the sweet fragrance. After eating her fill, she stepped outside to see squads of fully armed zombies. They were patrolling the farm in perfect order, proving that her father's ability to control these creatures was truly something special. It was far superior to any ordinary zombie king. She hugged his leg, pleading for a tour, and Hao naturally found himself unable to refuse. As he led her by the hand toward the vegetable garden, Chi-Chi watched him command the zombies. Having grown up in the countryside, Hao knew his way around a farm. He had spent his youth farming with his grandparents and felt confident he could restore these ruined plots to their former glory. Meanwhile, we see Hao take the 2 mutant beast cores he had collected and feed them to Pang, who successfully evolved to Tier 3. The zombie's body swelled like a balloon until he was as large as a truck, and strange, pitch-black scales began to grow across his skin. These scales were so tough they could stop bullets. When Hao tested them with a machete, they left only a faint scratch, turning Pang into a literal tank. With this Tier 3 general guarding the gate, Hao felt far more secure, and it was then that he discovered a new path to power. Since high-level zombies were so rare in the wild, he decided he would simply use the cores to cultivate and feed his own elite forces. Chi-Chi hadn't been idle during this time either. For 3 days, she had been sneaking off to the fish pond to visit that giant mutant turtle. She fed it mutant python meat mixed secretly with her own blood, and on the 3rd day, she performed an ancient beast-taming ritual from her past life. By using this ancient technique, she formed a bond with the giant turtle, allowing her to issue simple commands to the creature. She could even communicate with it mentally, and she even began teaching the turtle a specialized breathing technique she remembered. Her plan was to cultivate the beast until it became a powerful guardian, much like the legendary black tortoise from her previous existence. Hao, of course, had no idea any of this was happening. He simply thought Chi-Chi liked the turtle as a pet and let her be. To make her happy, he built a small amusement park on the farm, bringing back a carousel and other rides from the city. Since there was no electricity, he simply had his zombies push the rides by hand, a rather creative solution, to be honest. Though Chi-Chi felt she was a bit too old for such toys, she recognized her father's love and played along to make him happy. However, having been an orphan in her past life, she soon found herself genuinely enjoying the carefree childhood she never had. As they sat on the carousel, if one could ignore the groaning zombies providing the power, it would have been a perfectly heartwarming scene. But while Lightning 1 was busy transporting the equipment, an evolved human named Mo, who possessed the power of invisibility, was watching. He followed the truck all the way back to Qingshui Farm, and what he saw inside the gates left him completely stunned. The sight caused his entire worldview to collapse, especially when he realized a small human girl was living peacefully among a horde of zombies. He guessed that Chi-Chi was the one controlling these creatures, and a dark thought took root: he would kidnap her. His plan was to seize this zombie army for himself, so Mo used his invisibility to sneak into Chi-Chi's bedroom, raising his dagger to strike. Suddenly, he froze in place as Chi-Chi, or rather, Yun Ruoxue, activated a time-stop ability before leaping up and sending him flying with a powerful slap. She then used a soul chi technique from her past life to carve a blood-colored rune directly into his mind. Having gained absolute control over his life and death, she gave him a simple choice: die now or live as a servant. With the blood rune firmly etched into his soul, his fate was sealed. It was a matter of total submission or immediate erasure. Liemo chose to surrender without a moment's hesitation, and Yun Roashua ordered him to infiltrate the Jianghai City survivor group as a spy. He was to return regularly with intelligence, while Hao, completely unaware of this secret deal, only saw Chi-Chi playing happily on the farm every day. Sometime later, while Hao was out harvesting evolved zombies in the city, he unexpectedly ran into an old acquaintance on a nearby street. It was Su Muqin again, and honestly, he couldn't help but wonder why this woman kept crossing his path. After the tragedy at the police station, she had tracked them all this way just to find Chi-Chi, looking utterly exhausted and disheveled from the journey. She had been harassed by a burrowing zombie until she was on the verge of a breakdown, so Hao knocked her out and chained her up. He left her right next to the slide in the makeshift amusement park, but this time, Su Muqin's personality seemed to have undergone a massive shift. Having experienced the cold betrayal of the survivors at the station, she had become completely disillusioned with humanity. Chi-Chi took the opportunity to win her over, bringing her food and chatting until Su Muqin finally had a steady supply of resources again. She found herself living a comfortable life without fear, eventually admitting that living with a zombie king was actually quite pleasant. It was, ironically, far more peaceful than being among humans. Meanwhile, Hao continued to grow his strength in the Jiangnan district. By scavenging and purifying zombies to feed his forces, he managed to increase his number of Tier 2 elite zombies to over 30. Then, one night after hunting mutant beasts on Huanglong Mountain, he finally managed to obtain a Tier 3 core. Combined with the ongoing harvest from the gymnasium's zombie breeding base, Hao finally gathered enough resources to attempt a Tier 4 breakthrough. He consumed 4 Tier 3 cores all at once, triggering an immediate evolution that caused his mental power to surge several times over. With this newfound strength, his control range expanded significantly, now reaching across a radius of over 50 kilometers. His physical form underwent a complete transformation. Aside from his dark red pupils, he looked virtually indistinguishable from a living human. In one fell swoop, he cultivated 4 Tier 4 zombie elites, while Yun Roashua was also secretly breaking through to Tier 4 herself. These bloodthirsty demon vines were mutated plants he had transplanted from Huanglong Mountain, capable of draining the flesh and blood from any living creature. Strangely, they had no interest in zombies, so he planted them a kilometer away as a defense line, which Yun Roashua then refined with her techniques. This perimeter became a lethal formation she could control at will, yet a new crisis was approaching from the Jianghai survivor base. Due to the shifting tides of the map, the concept of a zombie king was officially announced, following Wang Zheng's previous encounter in the city. This caught the attention of the high-ranking officials, who dispatched a team of stealth users, including Liemo, to investigate the area. Sensing Liemo's approach, Yun Roashua flew out of the farm under the cover of night to meet him, ordering him to turn back. He was told to report that no zombie king was found, but Liemo also killed his defiant captain and used soul tools to control the other 3 members. However, Wang Zheng was far too sharp. Noticing something was off with the stealth team, he set a trap using a hypnotic interrogation. The soul tools restriction was triggered, causing the 4 stealth users to die instantly, a clear sign that something was very wrong. Wang Zheng was shocked, but now certain that a zombie king lurked in the Jiangnan district, and he immediately reported his findings. The base's supreme commander was furious, and while a storm was clearly brewing, Yun Roashua remained remarkably calm. Given their current strength, she believed that as long as the humans didn't deploy large-scale military forces, a mere purifier squad was no threat. They were simply no match for her and her father, so she poured all her effort into cultivation, knowing that a Tier 5 breakthrough was key. Once that level was reached, she felt confident they could withstand even a full-scale suppression by human thermal weaponry. Hao, meanwhile, was completely unaware of these hidden undercurrents, continuing his hunt for mutated beasts on Huanglong Mountain. Our story continues as the human forces gather a massive army, including 3 elite combat squads, preparing for the moment he breaks through to Tier 5. Even if faced with a full military suppression by thermal weaponry, he felt confident he could endure it, though, to be honest, he was currently oblivious to these rising tides. While he remained on Huanglong Mountain hunting mutated beasts, a formidable army was already amassing its strength at the Jinhe River. The forces landed on the outskirts of the Jiangnan district, with Wang Zheng serving as commander-in-chief alongside captains Li Feng and Zhang Hai. Among them was an evolver codenamed Falcon, who could share the vision of his contracted mutant Black Eagle, and it didn't take long for Falcon to spot something. He couldn't believe his eyes. A zombie was actually driving a truck through the city streets like a perfectly ordinary delivery man. The vehicle was transporting mutated beast flesh to the gymnasium to feed the zombie hordes, prompting Wang Zheng to order his team to follow it discreetly. Unaware of the eyes in the sky, Hao finished feeding the zombies at the gymnasium via his puppets and began the drive back to Qingshui Farm. High above the truck, the Black Eagle followed like a silent shadow, trailing the vehicle all the way to the perimeter of the farm. Through the eagle's eyes, Falcon took in the entire layout of the farm, reporting that the zombie had driven the truck into a suburban facility. Falcon whispered his report, noting that the farm's defenses were incredibly tight, far more than one would expect for a simple plot of land. Outside the perimeter walls, a massive thicket of blood-red vines had taken root, choking the landscape. Standing guard at the entrance was a giant zombie, its massive frame easily the size of a two-story building. Wang Zheng and his team watched in grim silence, realizing the zombie king's nest was right there in that farm. Zhang Hai swallowed hard, noting that the behemoth at the gate was at least a Tier 3 tank-type zombie. Its defensive power would be immense, and inside the farm, several more unusually large zombies were patrolling. Their auras were incredibly oppressive, suggesting at least 4 or 5 more Tier 3 threats lurking within. The drone couldn't get a full view from its current altitude, leaving them with a difficult choice: attack or retreat. Wang Zheng shook his head, deciding that a blind assault was far too risky given the unknown variables. They would send the intel back to base first, especially since those blood-red vines looked like a dangerous new mutation. It was highly likely that these defenses were the work of the Zombie King, and we have to wonder, where was that mysterious little girl? If the nest was indeed this farm, she was probably inside, but the greatest threat wasn't the girl, it was the Zombie King himself. They knew that if they alerted him, they would all die, so the 3 leaders decided to pause their operation for the time being. They transmitted the farm's location and defensive layout back to the Jianhai base, waiting for further instructions from the high-ranking officials. The news reached the Supreme Commander quickly, and once again, a heavy, suffocating atmosphere filled the meeting room. Wang Zheng's team had confirmed the location, reporting that the farm's defenses were incredibly tight, with at least several Tier 3 threats present. Beyond the walls, a line of unknown mutated plants formed a secondary defense, making the prospect of facing multiple Tier 3 zombies even grimmer. The Supreme Commander looked at his notes, asking how many Tier 3 evolvers the base currently had available to counter such a force. The answer was discouraging, less than 10, and all were scattered across various posts, making it nearly impossible to mobilize them all at once. Everyone understood that with the base's current strength, launching a frontal assault on a stronghold guarded by multiple Tier 3 zombies was suicide. The odds were slim to none, and the Supreme Commander finally made the call. They would not use force, but instead increase surveillance. They needed to map out the Zombie King's patterns and power limits while reporting to the capital to request urgent reinforcements. Furthermore, they had to accelerate their own training. Until the capital's support arrived, they absolutely could not afford to poke the hornet's nest. However, they had no idea that Air Pang, the guard at the gate, was already Tier 4, and that was without even considering Hao's own power. In reality, Qingshui Farm possessed 6 Tier 4 combatants, yet the humans were still using Tier 3 standards to underestimate Hao's true strength. Back at the farm, Hao finished his day of hunting and returned home to prepare a lavish dinner for little Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi ate happily, smiling at him with rice on her face, while Su Muqing quietly ate the meal Chi-Chi had brought her. As she ate, she stole glances at Hao, wondering how the Zombie King's appearance could have changed so drastically yet again. If one didn't look closely, he could pass for a living person, and a shocking realization began to take root in her mind. She wondered if this Zombie King would eventually evolve back into a human, and that night, Chi-Chi suddenly went to visit Su Muqing. Chi-Chi asked Su Muqing if humans were to attack her father, which side would she choose, leaving Muqing in a long, heavy silence. There was no answer. Muqing remained silent for a long time, unable to find the words to respond to such a question. Chi-Chi didn't seem to mind the silence. She simply turned to leave, muttering that it didn't matter since talking to her was useless anyway. Muqing sat weakly on the bed, watching Chi-Chi's retreating back, knowing that humans and the Zombie King were destined to be enemies. Eventually, they would have to face each other, but Muqing couldn't help but remember her treatment at the police station compared to this farm. Every day, Chi-Chi brought her food and chatted with her. Though the Zombie King kept her like a pet, he had never truly harmed her. She suddenly felt her situation was quite ironic. Muqing lay back on the bed, staring at the slide above her, unable to sleep all night. Meanwhile, on a high ground dozens of kilometers away, Wang Zheng's Black Hawk drone continued to circle silently over Qingshui Farm. The scout, Lai Ying, suddenly opened his eyes and reported that someone was leaving the farm, heading toward Huanglong Mountain. Wang Zheng nodded, continuing his watch to record her daily patterns, including her departure times and habits. He noted down every route and return time, still trying to find a way to see into the core area of the farm's interior. He was particularly desperate to find the Zombie King's true form, while the Black Hawk circled high above, capturing everything it could. We see Yun Roashua sitting on a swing, swaying back and forth as her white skirt flutters gently in the morning breeze. A bright smile lit up her small face, while Su Muqing leaned against the slide, watching the scene unfold. Muqing watched as Chi-Chi finally came outside today. Roashua knew that if Jianhai Base sent anyone now, they would only be walking to their deaths. Muqing asked little Chi-Chi if she would be coming out to play every day from now on, hoping for a bit of company. To be honest, she was feeling quite hopeful. Staying alone in the amusement park was becoming incredibly stifling for her. Of course, Ruashua nodded seriously. If she wanted to win over this future powerhouse, she naturally had to nurture their relationship. Suddenly, Muqing spoke with total sincerity, promising to help her and her father. Ruashua realized this was the answer to her question from the other day. The response caught her by surprise, considering Muqing's deep loyalty to the officials and her duty to protect human survivors. Muqing spoke with absolute gravity, explaining that she valued her promise to protect Ruashua more than her own life. She believed the zombie king possessed human consciousness and, with little Ruashua as his anchor, had never truly slaughtered humans. While the zombie king seemed non-aggressive for now, she knew that if humans ever harmed Ruashua, the consequences would be unpredictable. She worried he might descend into madness. Meanwhile, the Black Hawk drone followed a truck all the way out of Jiangnan City. As it reached the outskirts, the scout Lai Ying used the drone's eyes to survey the farm, but what she saw left her utterly stunned. We see a little girl on a swing while a human woman leans against a slide chatting with her, a scene far too peaceful for this world. Lai Ying immediately reported back to the captains that she had found the mysterious girl and a human woman staying together. The three captains exchanged uneasy looks, wondering if it was possible that this little girl was actually the zombie king himself. Suddenly, Ruashua felt an uncomfortable sensation of being watched, and she let her psychic power ripple outward like a rising tide. She discovered the Black Hawk circling above and realized it wasn't a wild mutant, but a contracted beast belonging to an evolver. Ruashua understood the situation quickly. This was no ordinary animal, but a tool used by those who were hunting them. She realized that the Zhanghai base must have sent more people, so she immediately launched an invisible psychic strike. The mental blade pierced the hawk's mind. As the bird faltered, Lai Ying assumed it was exhausted and hastily recalled it. Ruashua smiled knowingly and took control of a common sparrow to follow them, keeping a discreet distance as they retreated. The sparrow tracked them to a ravine outside the city, where three teams of evolvers were waiting and preparing their next move. To be honest, Ruashua found it quite hilarious that these people had actually mistaken her for the zombie king. Once her consciousness returned, she ran straight to her father and pointed toward the sky, signaling that they were no longer alone. He wondered if human evolvers had finally discovered the farm, and after confirming with Ruashua, he knew their location was compromised. Faced with this sudden threat, his expression grew heavy as he immediately ordered his entire army of zombie puppets to return. He gathered 4 level 4 puppets to guard the house and protect Ruashua, while Muqing also sensed that something was very wrong. Ruashua simply smiled and shook her head as the veil of night began to fall over the farm. Inside the house, he sat in the living room with eyes closed, using his psychic connection to monitor every corner of the property. 2 kilometers away in the dense woods, 3 teams of evolvers emerged, realizing they had finally reached the edge of the graveyard. Wang Lei warned everyone to stay alert. Meanwhile, a tiny bee perched on a branch was watching their every move. Ruashua felt a flicker of disdain as the teams approached the visual vines, kneeling down to cut through the thick growth. Suddenly, the magical vines pierced through 3 men, hungrily devouring their essence as the survivors realized the wall was alive. By the time Wang Lei and the others reacted, 5 people had been swallowed by the wall, and more were being impaled in the chaos. He watched the invaders through the eyes of his puppets, deciding that if they were looking for death, he would gladly provide it. He commanded his level 4 puppets to the residential area, where Tyrant 1 and Air Pang charged out, Air Pang swinging a massive club. The lead evolver was crushed instantly along with his rock shield, just as Flame 1 raised both hands toward the sky. Dozens of massive fireballs rained down, exploding among the crowd and engulfing 4 of the slower evolvers in a searing inferno. The remaining 6 were blasted backward, charred and broken, while Slave 1 immediately summoned a series of earth walls to trap them. Inside the enclosure, jagged rock spikes began to close in, forcing some to try and scale the high walls in a desperate escape. However, Flame 1 was waiting outside to blast them down. Meanwhile, Captain Li used the confusion to scramble over the barrier. His escape was short-lived, as Tyrant 1 was waiting to punch him deep into the dirt. It seemed Captain Lin and the others were finished. He hadn't noticed, however, that one evolver had used a substitution ability to shed their skin and slip away into the darkness. It was Ruashua who noticed through the bloodthirsty vines that one corpse hadn't been consumed, realizing a fish had escaped the net. Ruashua's brow furrowed in deep thought. She suspected the intruder had used a clone or a decoy ability to flee the scene. Still, her true strength remained a secret, and they still believed she was the zombie king, which might be a useful surprise later. That night, Muqing lay in bed tossing and turning, unable to find sleep after the unsettling events of the evening. Suddenly, a thought occurred to Ruashua. What if she could somehow prevent humanity from attacking the zombie king? Could she bring about a peaceful coexistence? Meanwhile, Qian Yun returned with the grim news that all 3 teams had been wiped out. Qian Yun's voice trembled as he reported that the zombie king commanded multiple level 4 evolved zombies and even plants that attacked humans. As the news spread, the High Command made a swift decision to seek immediate reinforcements from the imperial capital. Ruoxue eventually convinced him to unlock Su Muqing's chains, and shortly after, Muqing requested a private word with him. In the living room, Muqing got straight to the point, asking if he, the zombie king, still possessed his human consciousness. His gaze turned cold at the mention of his greatest secret, but he simply wrote back, "I won't kill you. Keep talking." Muqing took a deep breath and reminded him that little Chi-Chi was, after all, still a human being. She asked if he truly wanted the girl to live among zombies forever, a question that left him in a long, thoughtful silence. She then posed a bold hypothetical. If she one day became the leader of the human race, would he agree to live in peace? Both he and Ruoxue were stunned by her ambition, though he didn't refuse, telling her to come back once she actually achieved it. The next day, Ruoxue decided to reveal a portion of her strength to him, hoping to ease his mind about fully freeing Muqing. She excitedly announced that she had awakened a superpower, spreading her arms and flying around the room to his absolute delight. Now that little Chi-Chi had become an evolver, he began training her in earnest, having her practice her attacks using iron nails. He even prepared poison needles for her to use as hidden weapons while she continued her diligent practice with the nails. To him, little Chi-Chi was becoming his ultimate trump card, a secret weapon hidden in plain sight, so to speak. Meanwhile, Zhanghai Base City finally received a response from the capital, which dispatched the elite Sky Squad to support them. The Sky Squad consisted entirely of level 3 flying evolvers, arriving quickly in a formation of 5 heavy transport helicopters. They immediately launched a fierce bombardment on the farm, much to his fury, though his level 4 puppets remained completely unharmed. Flame 1 and Flame 2 transformed into towering fire giants, weaving a massive net of flames to trap the Sky Squad in midair. Undead 1's bloodthirsty lightning orbs and divine light combined with Tyrant 1's steel staff to systematically cut down the escaping purifiers. From the shadows, Ruoxue used her time manipulation powers alongside poison needles to eliminate several enemies rushing toward the house. Su Muqing fought desperately to protect little Chi-Chi, eventually falling in a pool of blood after being impaled, but she was resurrected almost instantly. She immediately returned to the fray as 3 elite teams and the Sky Squad were wiped out, leaving only Qian Yun, who escaped using a substitute ability. With the farm utterly destroyed and the location exposed, he decided not to rebuild, knowing it was time for them and little Chi-Chi to move on. He wrote on a piece of paper that wherever they went would be home, and surprisingly, Su Muqing chose to stay and travel with them. The convoy headed south after leaving the farm, arriving at Beichen City, where he triggered a zombie nest to harvest the purified zombies. During the chaos, he wiped out the local Dragon Tiger gang, though the second-in-command, Zhang Qing, and a flying purifier managed to escape. The survivors fled to the Beichen base to report him, while he finished clearing the city's zombies and set the convoy in motion once more. After breaking through to level 5, his mental power exploded, expanding his control range to over 50 kilometers, which was quite a feat. He could now control a massive number of level 4 zombie puppets simultaneously, and already had 3 level 5 puppets under his command. We see that Shanchuan City was entirely different, crawling with fierce beasts, so he led his army of puppets into the urban jungle. They hunted the beasts throughout the city, gathering a fortune in energy cores and eventually destroying the Beast King cult entrenched in Mount Sangyue. He looted a massive hoard of supplies and vegetables from their caves, but as the cult's protector died, he left behind a chilling warning. The dying man mentioned their leader had gone to subdue a level 5 beast, putting him on high alert regarding the cult leader, Huangxian. Sure enough, Huangxian soon came looking for him. Before the apocalypse, she had been nothing more than a debt-collecting thug. After awakening her beast-taming ability, she rose to power, seeking to use the thunderous roar to avenge her sister by destroying Shanchuan base. She proposed an alliance, claiming they shared a common enemy, but Su Muqing stepped forward and decisively rejected the offer on his behalf. She simply told her they weren't interested, and after being snubbed, Huangxian spitefully sent a mutant pangolin to launch a sneak attack from underground. However, Ruoxue killed the creature in a single strike, sending a terrified Huangxian fleeing into the distance in a complete panic. And so, she leaked our location to the Zhanghai Base City, while in the urban heart of Shanchuan, Ruoxue successfully broke through to level 5 in mental power. She could now condense her mental energy into physical needles capable of piercing walls, and her time manipulation had even evolved into a profound temporal mystery. This new power allowed her to make targets age and decay instantly, while Su Muqing also reached level 4, thanks to her cultivation and constant combat. He jokingly suggested that Aunt Zhao Lin should be called the Black Bull Knight from now on, but she flatly refused the ridiculous title. Meanwhile, the imperial capital deployed their ultimate trump card, the Tunglong Squad, a team famous for their past successes. They had even managed to kill a zombie king before, and their key operative was a man known as Zhao the Disguiser. This elite squad had a reputation for being unstoppable after successfully taking down a high-level zombie king. Their secret weapon was Zhao Bin, who could mimic any living creature to infiltrate enemy lines without being detected. Their plan was to use their old tricks, draw attention from the outside, while Zhao Bin disguised himself as a zombie to slip inside. Once he found the zombie king, he would deliver a single, fatal blow. Then, one night, Ruoxue finally gathered her courage. She looked at him and confessed that she actually possessed the power of time manipulation. She revealed to her father that she had already become a level 5 awakened, a secret she had been holding on to. With a determined look, she told him that from now on, she would be the one to protect him. Later, Flame 1 used its spirit body to ignore physical attacks, but a sudden barrage from mobile howitzers caught him completely off guard. At that critical moment, Ruoxue intervened in a fit of rage, declaring that no one was allowed to hurt her father. She unleashed her full temporal power, and under the pressure of her mental energy, every single shell was sent flying back the way it came. The explosion wiped out the entire artillery position, and while the survivors tried to flee in a panic, his army of zombie puppets hunted them down. Only a single purifier, Commander Shuni, managed to escape the slaughter, leaving the Lijiang base's offensive forces almost entirely destroyed. He watched as little Chi-Chi displayed her terrifying strength, realizing that the enemy's forces had been utterly decimated. Looking at the incredible power little Chi-Chi now possessed, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride in how far she had come. The humans had been utterly crushed, and we see that not even a level 5 zombie puppet could stand against Ruoxue's newfound power. Meanwhile, the Tunglong squad's helicopters were already flying toward Shanchuan City, carrying Zhao Bin, the man who could mimic any living soul. He sat there calmly wiping his combat blade with a confident smile, assuring his captain that this mission would be a guaranteed success. After the battle at Lijiang ended, he sat on the living room sofa, observing the surroundings through the eyes of his zombie puppets. Ruoxue walked over to his side with a serious expression, telling him quite plainly that they couldn't afford to stay there any longer. He nodded in agreement, as this was a reality he had already considered long before she even spoke. Though they had won the recent skirmish, the cost of exposing their location was far too high, and Su Muqing soon joined them from the window. With the dust of battle still lingering on her face, she urged Li Moyan that they needed to leave immediately. The reaction speed of the Lijiang Bay city was surprisingly fast, and if reinforcements arrived, they risked being completely surrounded. Half an hour later, the convoy was already speeding south along the main highway of the Lijiang urban district. Using the high-altitude reconnaissance of Flight 1, he confirmed there were no signs of the remaining Lijiang forces pursuing them for now. After 2 hours of driving at full speed, they finally crossed the city limits, prompting Ruoxue to ask where they were headed next. She leaned against the backseat window, her small face pressed against the glass as she watched the world blur past. He spread out a map, his eyes scanning the territory of Jiang Province, noting that Linen City lay directly to the south. Going any further south would mean leaving Jiang Province entirely, which was a significant move considering the current state of the world. The base cities within Jiang Province had already formed an information network, making it nearly impossible for him to stay hidden there. However, once they crossed the provincial border, information sharing would slow down significantly, giving them a much-needed head start. By the time other provinces reacted, he would be long gone, though Su Muqing was surprised by the idea of traveling so far. Ruoxue answered for him, noting that distance was a good thing, as staying in Jiang Province meant eventually being hunted down again. After a moment of thought, Su Muqing dropped her objections, and the convoy continued its long journey toward the southern horizon. Along the way, he harvested a batch of zombie gold boxes, and by evening, we see them setting up camp near an abandoned gas station. Su Muqing added a grilled rib to little Chi-Chi's plate before taking a large gulp of beer herself, looking quite content. She wondered aloud if Li Moyan had been a professional chef in his past life, a thought Ruoxue met with a knowing smile. He sat in the passenger seat scanning the map, noting that they were still about 200 kilometers from the Jiang Province border. The problem, however, was Linen City, a sprawling urban center that sat directly across their path from north to south. Bypassing it was nearly impossible, meaning they had to go through it, and a city like Linen surely housed a major base. He frowned, realizing that if Lijiang base had alerted them, the entire area would likely be a massive trap waiting to spring. It could easily turn into another brutal battle, a concern Ruoxue seemed to sense as she walked over with a smile. She leaned against the car window to peek at the map, asking if he was worried about what lay ahead in Linen. She told him not to worry because she was there to protect him, even giving her small fist a determined little squeeze. Her expression was so serious that he couldn't help but laugh, reaching out to gently pinch her small, soft cheek. But in that brief moment of peace, he caught something through the eyes of Flight 1 on the distant northern horizon. There were small, dark specks moving against the sky. Assuming it was Lijiang's helicopters, he immediately signaled Su Muqing to get little Chi-Chi back into the safety of the vehicle. Su Muqing didn't hesitate for a second, scooping up Ruoxue and running for the car as Ruoxue's gaze narrowed in focus. There were 3 helicopters, but they didn't belong to Lijiang, a realization that caused Su Muqing's expression to shift instantly. The aircraft circled a few kilometers to the north for a while before finally vanishing from sight, though he didn't relax. He kept Flight 1 trailing them from a distance, watching as 7 heavily armed soldiers descended from the landed helicopters. The leader was a man with a buzz cut who radiated the unmistakable aura of a level 4 combatant as they touched down. They began to set up camp immediately, proving they were no amateurs, but likely the elite force of a major base city. Either they were sent by the capital, and the mere thought of the capital made his heart tighten, remembering the Sky Squad at Qingshui Farm. After he had wiped them out, he realized this might be the capital's second ace team, so he decided to stay put for now. He had Flight 1 continue its surveillance while he ordered the convoy to cut their engines and hide in the darkness. As that 7-man team set up camp, their frequent checks of maps and documents made it clear they were on a specific mission. This was no coincidence. They were coming for him. Ruashue wasn't sleeping either, while Hanzo practiced his cultivation in the back seat. Sensing the shift in his mood, she looked at him. "Dad, is something wrong?" she asked, as he began writing on a piece of paper. He wrote that a well-equipped 7-man team from the north, likely from the capital, was looking for them. After Ruashue finished reading, her brow furrowed slightly. If this truly was an elite squad from the capital, things were about to get difficult. There were likely special ability users among them. After all, the last Sky Squad had been entirely composed of flight types. This time, they might face something even more troublesome, which was exactly what he feared. Suddenly, one member of the 7-man team moved. A tall, thin young man left the camp and walked alone into the nearby mountain forest. Once deep among the trees, something changed. His aura shifted instantly from that of a human to that of a zombie. This man, it seemed, could perfectly disguise himself as the undead. In an instant, Li Moyen understood their tactics. If he hadn't known about this, the infiltrator might have successfully blended in. He could have joined the stone golems and struck when he got close. To be honest, that's likely how the previous zombie king was killed. Little Chi-Chi would be in trouble again. He quickly wrote down the details of the infiltrator for Ruashue to read. Her expression became extremely grave. As she processed the idea of someone disguising themselves as a zombie, the innocence faded from her face. It was replaced by a sharp, piercing gaze. Such an ability was rare indeed, and if the disguise was perfect, it would be a nightmare. She noted that even his mental power might not be able to tell the difference. "Leave it to me," she said with calm confidence. Her time control allowed her to perceive the flow of time in all living things, and the flow of time for zombies and humans is quite different. She could sense that flow in every creature. Since the biological processes in a zombie's body have already stopped, their time moves differently. The process of aging in a zombie is frozen, whereas no matter how a human disguises themselves, their internal flow of time remains normal. She promised that as long as she sensed carefully, she would definitely root him out. He felt a sense of relief, though he still refused to underestimate the enemy. We see him change the plan, writing on the paper that they would bypass Linen City entirely and take a detour through the mountain roads to strike. Su Muqing woke up just then, rubbing her eyes as she leaned in to read the note, noting that a detour would add several days to their journey. He believed traveling a few extra days was better than walking into an ambush. Seeing their serious expressions, Muqing didn't ask any more questions before dawn. He deliberately chose a remote mountain path, a route that was incredibly difficult to traverse, but offered the benefit of being highly concealed. However, it seems he underestimated the enemy's tracking capabilities. After the convoy had traveled for about 3 hours, he received a new report. That 7-man team had already broken camp and was moving south, their path perfectly parallel to the convoy. They were being followed. Through Flight 1's high-altitude perspective, we discover a mutated eagle, not a bear, circling in the sky far above the convoy. Shooting the creature down would only alert the enemy, likely causing them to abandon their current strategy immediately. They might switch from an ambush to an all-out assault. After a moment's thought, he decided that if they wanted to use an infiltrator, he would let them. Su Muqing, however, remained somewhat hesitant about the risks involved in this dangerous game of cat and mouse. Ruashue patted her chest confidently, promising that with her there, the enemy wouldn't stand a chance. Muqing looked at the young girl, considering her words. She remembered the scene from yesterday where Ruashue redirected an entire artillery regiment's shells and quietly kept her mouth shut. The plan was set. As evening fell, the convoy stopped to set up camp in a wide river valley, where Li Moyen arranged only a small number of zombie puppets. He hid his high-level puppets in the surrounding woods, making the camp's defenses look full of holes from the outside. After nightfall, the trap was laid. He sat by the campfire pretending to relax, though in reality, his mental power was fully extended to cover the entire area. Ruashue remained in a constant state of temporal sensing, while Su Muqing actually managed to fall asleep. Then, at midnight, the moment arrived. His mental power captured an anomaly. At the edge of the camp, an ordinary-looking zombie was slowly and cautiously approaching. His appearance was identical to any other member of the undead, but his route was far too deliberate to be a coincidence. He bypassed the patrolling zombie puppets, slipping through the gaps in the defense toward the heart of the camp, while Li Moyen carefully avoided alerting him. Instead, he continued to pretend he noticed nothing at all as the zombie drew closer, finally reaching the very edge of the camp. The intruder's gaze swept around the campfire before finally locking onto Moyen, and he suddenly charged forward with a short blade in hand. Just as the infiltrator reached a distance of 5 meters, his time simply stopped, and Yunroashua stepped calmly out of her tent. Her expression was cold as she confirmed he was indeed human, noting that a true zombie would have no internal flow of time. His heart was still beating, a detail that gave him away. Moyen stood up and walked over to inspect the frozen infiltrator. We see him observe that the man's heart was still pulsing beneath the disguise. Moyen stood up to get a better look. Examining the spy closely, he realized the disguise, from the outward appearance to the scent, was almost entirely flawless. To be honest, without Roashua's mastery over time, he might not have seen through the ruse immediately. But then, the moment for subtlety ended. He released his mental power, sending out the signal for an all-out assault to the rank 5 lion puppets hidden in the forest. Meanwhile, several kilometers away in a temporary camp, a 7-person team instantly sensed a wave of killing intent so overwhelming it was impossible to ignore. Their leader, a man with a buzz cut named Qin Hung, realized their scout had been exposed and shouted for everyone to prepare for battle. But it was already too late. Flame 1's Bloodfire arrived first, and in less than 10 seconds, their 3 helicopters were transformed into massive fireballs. Their retreat was cut off, leaving 1 Purifier's face pale with terror as Undead 1 followed closely behind the initial blast. A crimson light enveloped a Purifier who was mid-ability, and the man felt his body being pulled uncontrollably toward Undead 1. A moment later, a blood spirit serpent pierced through his chest. Simultaneously, Flight 1 dove down from the high heavens. Expanding its flight domain, a spherical field of slowing energy descended, catching the long-range attacks of 2 other Purifiers. The projectiles slowed instantly, their power reduced to almost nothing, while Flight 1's steel claws remained completely unaffected by the field. Qin Heng's own ability allowed him to metallize his skin, covering his entire body in a silver armor with incredible defensive power. Air Pang swung his club down, and though the metal armor dented, it didn't shatter, but a second strike was already following right behind it. The metal armor shattered as Qin Hung spat out a mouthful of blood, his body sent flying through the air before he could even hit the ground. Undead 1's serpent was already in pursuit, ending Qin Heng's life on the spot, a fact Moyen confirmed through the eyes of his puppet. With the 7-person team completely wiped out, he breathed a sigh of relief and walked back to the camp to observe the scene. The infiltrator remained frozen in place, and the commotion had finally startled Su Muqin awake from her rest. She stepped out draped in a coat, looking quite startled, but Yun Roashua simply told her to kill him with a calm wave of her hand. A needle of mental energy pierced the infiltrator's brow. As the time freeze lifted, his body went limp and slumped to the earth. As he reverted to his human form, Muqin knelt down and pulled an ID from his inner pocket. It belonged to the Hunglong squad. Moyen felt no particular ripple of emotion, but Roashua's reaction was unexpected as she stared at the ID for a long, silent moment. We see the weight of the situation. The capital had sent 2 elite teams in a row, and both had been completely annihilated. Deep down, she knew they would soon classify her father as a maximum-level threat, and the intensity of the hunt would only multiply. The loss of 2 ace squads would only convince the capital further of the Zombie King's extreme danger. They wouldn't give up, they would only double down, so, as Moyen wrote on his paper, they had to leave immediately. That very night, the convoy set out without further delay, with Flight 1 scouting from high above to ensure no pursuers followed. As they neared the outskirts of Linen City, he decided to cut straight through rather than detour, which would have added 5 days. To be honest, spending 5 extra days in the wilderness was a risk they simply couldn't afford to take right now. Since the previous conflict was so massive, choosing a route far from the base city and moving fast meant the chance of discovery was low. He released his mental power in advance, taking control of all zombies along the path and commanding them to clear the way for the convoy. The entire fleet moved through the dark city streets in total silence, and for a while, it seemed they would pass through successfully. They had cleared most of the Linen urban area and were approaching the southern exit when the situation suddenly shifted. Flight 1 sent back an urgent report. A military convoy was parked directly on the viaduct at the city's southern exit. We see several armored vehicles blocking the path ahead, their heavy frames casting long shadows across the asphalt. It seemed that after receiving reports of the Zombie King's appearance, they had established checkpoints at all major entrances and exits. Yun Roashua spoke up, suggesting that a direct confrontation here would only delay them further. Moyen agreed. The convoy immediately changed direction, turning into a secluded alleyway to begin a detour toward the west. Consulting the map, he planned to cut through the industrial zone in western Linen and exit via the ring road there. However, the road conditions in the industrial zone were abysmal, cluttered with collapsed factories and abandoned vehicles. 20 minutes later, the convoy finally emerged onto the ring road, and just as he thought they might actually make a clean escape, the sudden, thunderous roar of engines echoed from behind as 3 attack helicopters approached from the direction of the city. Their searchlights cut through the night, scanning the ground for any sign of movement. With a single thought, Moyen signaled the drivers to accelerate. The convoy surged forward, but the helicopters were fast, their lights locking onto the vehicles before their cannons began to spit fire. Bullets struck the road at the rear of the convoy, sending sparks flying as a voice over the loudspeaker commanded them to stop for inspection. They threatened to open fire in earnest, but Moyen ignored them, sending Flight 1 into the air from the center of the fleet. The drone transformed into a streak of crimson light to provide cover, and the convoy raced onward until the first light of dawn appeared. They finally spotted the sign marking the border between Jiang Province and the neighboring province, but as they crossed that line, Flight 1 transmitted an image from high above that caused Moyen's confident expression to freeze instantly. On a hilltop just south of the border, Wang Xian stood alone, looking down at the convoy as it passed into the new territory. The fleet continued its desperate pace through the morning light, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the city. They reached the provincial boundary markers once more, yet the feeling of being watched only grew heavier as they crossed. Another image from Flight 1 confirmed his worst fears, chilling the air inside the lead vehicle more than any winter wind could. Wang Xian remained there, watching them from a distance, not attacking, but simply observing and tracking their every move. Enro also noticed Wang Xian's presence, and a flicker of coldness crossed her small face. She warned that this man was dangerous and wouldn't give up easily, asking if they should eliminate him now. Moyen shook his head. Though they had killed Wang Xian's armored beast, the man himself was a powerful tamer. He likely had hidden trump cards, and Moyen knew this wasn't the best time to deal with him. Besides the snakes, everything needed a long-term plan. Let's move first, he wrote, prioritizing their escape over a confrontation. The convoy continued south, crossing into the neighboring province where the road conditions improved significantly. The wide highways still had some vehicle blockages, but they were far better than the rugged mountain paths from before. 3 days later, we see them arrive at Yunzhou City, which, before the apocalypse, was a massive metropolis of 3 million people. Now, naturally, it had become a kingdom for the zombies. But for Moyen, this place wasn't a wasteland. It was a massive, untapped treasure trove. A population of 3 million meant a staggering number of zombies, and a high density of zombies meant an abundance of purification opportunities and energy cores. Plus, being far from Jiang Province, news traveled slowly. For a short while, they wouldn't have to worry about pursuit from the human bases. As the convoy entered Yunzhou, Moyen followed his usual routine, unleashing his zombie nest to sweep the area and harvest energy cores one by one. Meanwhile, Enro focused on her cultivation while feeding her old turtle. After days of steady accumulation, the old turtle finally reached the 4th realm. It was now large enough to host a card game on its back. Su Muqing wasn't idle either. Every day, she rode her black bull, Dahe, out to hunt fierce beasts. Her strength grew steadily as she practiced the 9-element pulse-breaking bow technique taught by Enro. Her aura became deeper and more profound, while Moyen used this time to further expand his army of zombie puppets. By harvesting the energy cores of Yunzhou's zombies, he successfully raised several more puppets to the 4th realm. Moyen felt confident enough to face a medium-sized base head-on, but his priority remained finding a safe haven. He simply wanted a place where little Shiji could grow in peace. Unfortunately, on their 5th night in Yunzhou City, that dream of a quiet sanctuary was interrupted, as finding safety in this world is never quite as simple as it sounds. While conducting high-altitude reconnaissance with Flight 1, Moyen spotted something troubling on the monitors. To the northwest of the city, a massive convoy was steadily advancing toward their current position. We see dozens of military trucks, armored vehicles, and tanks, all escorted by 6 heavily armed attack helicopters. In the center of the fleet were command vehicles marked with special insignias, and they were heading straight for the heart of Yunzhou. It seemed the news had finally caught up with them. Moyen realized the capital's wanted order for the zombie king had likely expanded to Ling province. This force was probably a specialized task force assembled by the local base city. Of course, there was also the possibility that Wang Xian had leaked their location to the local authorities out of spite. Regardless of the reason, they couldn't stay. Su Muqing, already used to this nomadic life, began silently packing their gear. Meanwhile, Enro walked to the window and stared out at the quiet, desolate city streets below. She told him that they couldn't keep running forever. He knew she was right, but for now, there was no other choice. He promised her that one day the running would stop. Enro turned back and gave him a small, knowing smile. In that smile, we see a sense of calm and determination that far exceeds her young age. Then, in the early morning hours, the convoy vanished into the darkness of Yunzhou. Dozens of kilometers away, however, the military force continued its relentless advance. Inside the lead command vehicle, a cold-faced, middle-aged man sat reviewing a thick stack of documents. The cover was stamped with a red top-secret seal, bearing a simple, chilling title, The Zombie King File. The man closed the folder and looked toward the distant silhouette of Yunzhou. This time, he was certain Moyen wouldn't escape.